Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 23rd, 2026 meeting of the Baltimore City Planning Commission, meeting number 2089. I'm John Laria, the Commission Chair. Seated next to me is Ren Southard, our Acting Planning Director and Executive Secretary of the Commission. Mr. Tiso, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Allen.
Present.
Councilman Bullock.
Present.
Commissioner Griffin.
Present.
Claudia Jolin.
Present.
Doug McCoach.
Present.
Jane Lewis.
Present.
Eric Stevenson.
Present.
And Chair Laria.
Present. Thank you. We have a quorum. Commissioners, we have the minutes to approve from the April 2nd meeting of the Commission. Is there a motion to approve them, please? Don't all jump at once. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Minutes are approved. We'll now turn to items on our consent agenda. The first item is CIP transfers, and in keeping with our custom for those CIP transfers which are determined to be not consistent with the CIP, which is almost never as ominous as it sounds, we would just like to hear from the staff about the reason and rationale behind those transfers, please.
Good afternoon. Nelson Vasconcelos, Capital Planning Analyst for DOP. So there are 7 transfers before the Commission. The first 5 are all related. So basically, these are all accounts that have received program open space funds from Maryland DNR. Rec and Parks initially appropriates them based on projections of what they would receive from the state. And so these transfers are all to sort of correct those amounts to match what was actually received. And then moving on to...
Could I just, I'm sorry. So you're saying that, let's just take one for an example, just so we understand. So the first one, you have a 300,000 and a 100,000 from certain, but they're, obviously it's the same accounts, right? Because it was what you just said.
Right.
Are you saying, so why is that a transfer as opposed to a correction? What are you actually transferring when you do that?
So the, for example, that PRJ 1540, that is the account that actually receives the funds. So the amount that was initially appropriated did not match what was actually given by the state. And so the funds that it was coming from is from old accounts that with excess appropriations.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow what you're saying. We got, so can you give me a specific example? Like, can you make one of those more specific possibly so I can understand?
I'm trying to find a...
So for the Leah Dubots, Capital Improvement Program Supervisor. So for the example that Nelson was sharing for transfer number 1, the amounts are actually correct, but we are transferring it from a broader program to a more specific project. So that's what triggers the transfer in this instance for program open space funds. So they had received those funds for that specific project, which is where we're moving the $300,000.
But that's not, that. So the explanation is not that the amounts appropriated did not match what was ultimately awarded, or it is?
We will need to correct that on the memo.
Well, okay, which ones? Because it's the same number.
Yes, and it is.
I'm trying to understand what if I see the same number, that doesn't sound like correcting a POS amount. That sounds like moving it from one account to the other, which is what we're accustomed to seeing, that things move from one appropriate account to another to, for the obvious reasons. So I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to correct in the memo. So the amounts are correct. We are just moving them from one account to another account because we received more clarity on the specific projects.
Okay, certainly don't want to hold these up. I'm sure there's nothing, I'm sure these are correct, but I would just like to understand maybe at the next meeting or just with a quick email to us, kind of what's the actual clarification,
Absolutely.
if that's okay.
We can do that.
Okay, and I'm sorry, and back to you, Nelson, I interrupted your flow, I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. And yeah, we can provide an updated memo with that additional information. Then moving on to transfer 6. So this is a transfer to cover a contract for urgent need water main repair. And in this case, there are excess appropriations at FY21 account, and so they are moving to the 2986, the Phase 3 account to cover that contract. And then moving on to the last transfer 7. This is similar. It's to cover contracts for flow monitoring, and the from accounts are reserve accounts with with available appropriations from projects that have been completed from those accounts.
Okay. We'll take a motion in a moment with these items, but one other question for you, and it might be for Ms. Dubatz as well, or otherwise, is where do we stand? What's sort of the update on the transfers protocol process, where we've talked over the last year, largely with Ms. Perenillum, about the sequencing of these transfer approvals, whether they go here, the Board of, the sequencing, particularly between the Planning Commission and the Board of Estimates. What's the latest on that?
So we are currently working with the Comptroller's Office on updating the system called BOE Submit. So they have that in testing right now, and once that moves out of testing, we'll be able to implement the new transfer process where everything's coming to the Planning Commission first, and the Planning Commission's providing a recommendation to the Board of Estimates on whether to approve or not the transfers.
Do you have any ETA? I just don't have a sense of whether that's like a week, a month.
I'd say within the next couple of months, depending on how long the testing takes.
I just like to, I would appreciate if you could just keep us updated on that, because I think it's something that we really appreciate is happening. We've said many times that we're grateful for these improvements, and it would be great to just keep us up to date.
Yep, of course, we can definitely do that.
Were there questions for staff on the transfers? Okay. So the consent agenda, there are 3 items on the consent agenda. We'll take a motion for all 3 items, and we'll have a voice vote unless there's any concern about that. Is there any objection to proceeding that way? Hearing none, items 3, 4, and 5 on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve those items?
So moved.
What's the matter?
Chairman, I have to recuse myself from item number 5.
That's fine,
Thank you.
for the record. Okay, is there a motion? Did I hear, I'm sorry, did I?
There's a motion.
There's a
So
motion,
moved.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay, if there's any discussion on that motion? I suspect not. All right, well, all those in favor, please, of the motion, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Nay? Motion carries, that's the consent agenda, thank you very much. Oops. Okay, we'll now move to items on the regular agenda. Ms. Executive Secretary, would you please call the first item for us?
Item number 6, City Council Bill number 26-0158, Data Centers Moratorium. This is citywide, and Austin Davis will present.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Austin Davis. And as Director Southard said, this is for the purpose of establishing data centers as a prohibited use citywide, defining certain terms, making conforming changes, and providing a special effective date, and providing for the termination of certain provisions of this ordinance. So I'm going to get into essentially what the bill does, talk about some case studies, and then I have 3 sections to discuss its relevance and to continue with our recommendation. So this bill is effectively adding data centers to the list of uses prohibited citywide. The definition has a facility used for remote storage, processing, and distribution of data capable of using 10 megawatts or more of electricity. And I should point out the exclusion of research, so smaller in-building server rooms, institutional IT infrastructure, offices, hospitals, university, et cetera. And then its duration, as outlined in Section 2, will automatically sunset after 1 year of enactment. So this is functionally a temporary moratorium. Nationally, data centers are pretty much our largest, or if not one of our rapidly evolving sectors. The combination of cloud computing demand, AI, and just overall digital services, think of your AWS, across the economy. And here, kind of regionally, Loudoun County, Virginia is the largest data cluster in the country. And so, with us as the neighbor, it's understandable that we will be seeing this growth in our state. And kind of where is Baltimore's position in this market? Well, the state of Maryland has us designated as a Tier 1 area, which means that is allowable for tax exemption and a tax exemptive initiative program. So we're really eligible for the most, favorable breaks and incentives for someone to open up one of these facilities. We sit on the PJM grid and we're within the BG service territory, which is important to note because I believe that, these types of developments, and I'll get into this later, will have potential effects on the grid. And I should point out that Frederick County, is open for development and we are downwind of them. So here are some comparable jurisdictions. I have a combination of local, regional, cities, states, and then an international one that I'm going to get into. And I'm not going to read all of these verbatim. However, the overarching theme is that there was a moratorium proposed of some amounts, in some cases pretty short, in other cases years. And there were a lot of overarching key concerns, mainly in a land use and zoning side of things. We look at St. Louis, where it was a 70-year-old zoning code, and so it was inaccurate for these types of land use designations. And similarly with Dayton, Ohio. So we want to kind of look at what did other jurisdictions do, what are other places doing, and what does it make sense for our city to do. And this brings me into my first and only really case study here, which is Singapore. I looked at Singapore because they're pretty much the international leader in data centers. And in 2019, data centers were about 7% of their total electricity and 82% of their emissions. So that was enough for them to say we're going to pause, even still being a top global data center market. And so what happened was a multi-year conditional use framework that started with a pilot, which they have it as referred to as a call for application. You might think of it as a request for proposal, but it was for roughly 80 megawatts total to be awarded, and they ended up picking 4 operators, and this was an efficiency-based criteria selection. So what does that mean? Well, PUE, or power usage effectiveness, which is essentially a ratio of how you use power to its effective nature of it, and water usage effectiveness, which is the same thing for water, had 2 specific caps at 1.3 for the power, and the water was like 2 meters cubed per megawatt hours. And all this is to say that they had very strict regulations on per hour of use. How much can you produce in terms of emissions, or how much power are you drawing? How much water do you need to clean out your systems and to cool it? And they actually increased the stringency on these areas in 2025, and they also required a mandatory green mark platinum, which is Singapore's version of LEED, so that these buildings require immense, at the highest level of emissions, protections, power protections, and they wanted to have essentially a qualified green energy pathway. So this was, I took time to pull this out because this is essentially like the best case scenario globally. And Singapore is a very expensive place to do just about anything. And this has not stopped their abilities at opening and, running data centers. Now, into our conformity to city plans, unfortunately, our comprehensive master plan does not specifically address data centers. So I feel like an absence of a policy framework really underscores our need to create a study period contemplated by this moratorium. And I look at a different planning framework, which would be our Commission on Sustainability. Our Sustainability Commission's Climate Action Plan is a national leader, and it is very clear on our carbon footprint and the causes of our carbon footprint. And without directly quoting it, I believe that downtown buildings and buildings in general were one of our largest GHG emission drivers. So that to me shows how we need to have some sort of dynamic way to solve this problem and to work around it before we get too far down the pipeline. Now, in zoning and land use terms, we really have some things to look at and to solve here. I'm not going to read through all of this, but our use compatibility, like where can that go in the table? What type of use is it? Is it industrial, commercial? How are we going to define it? The employment mismatch. So traditionally where our industrial and commercial zones are located in the city may not be the best for where we want to put some of these data centers, relative to the alternative uses that are around it or the existing uses that are around it, especially if we look at the job creation that is a result of these centers. And then the other things that I really want to talk about are the adjacency buffers, the bulk standards, the lot standards, and the EJ concern, which all kind of go hand in hand. Generator noise, cooling plants, and all of these other things, along with just the physical building footprint size, really need to be taken into account when we're looking at this, because where are these going to go? How is this going to affect its nearby residents? And we want to make sure that in a city that's experienced significant redlining, that we're not further pushing residents, who have been negatively affected by things like this, into a continuing path. So this right here is kind of an opportunity to show that not all data centers are alike. This is supposed to highlight a low impact profile and a high impact profile of a data center that currently we have no regulations around. So from the low impact side, you're seeing a behind the meter renewable or dedicated PPA. So something that's really actively working against how much energy can be used. Closed loop or air-cooled centers with recycling plans and some sort of water usage target that's disclosed. The siting, where is it going to be? Is it buffered? Are there community benefits involved? And the transparency from the actual end user, the owners, et cetera, along with the public. So how are they planning to use the water, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things, in a data center is a pretty low impact profile. Whereas the other end, you see something that's drawing from the grid and probably using RECs as the offset. There's maybe not as much disclosed mitigation on water usage. Perhaps it's in a place that is not adequately centered for this type of building, and perhaps there's not very much community or public transparency between the operators. So given both sides of the coin, these are kind of what we have to look at for extremes. So further, we would really need to define some criteria as to where these can go. What would the minimum setbacks and buffer distances be? Designated employment and industrial zones? Are we going to look at overlays? This is all just to build the discussion as to what is required to go into a concerted effort to plan around this in the year's moratorium. So I now will break into 3 sections. This first section will discuss the environmental and public health considerations. So essentially a case for a pause. There's a ratepayer protection. There's been a lot of considerable infrastructure projects in our city, state, and region. PJM is New Jersey to Pennsylvania, us, Delaware. Anyway, there's 7 states, and the ratepayers are seeing significant trickle-down effects of large-scale infrastructure projects. Maine and Michigan and a few other states actually cited electricity prices as the driver for their moratorium. And obviously the water resources are very important to think about, especially in a city that has about 9% of its total area as water. And then finally, air quality, if there's diesel backups and green energy standards that we want to maintain or want to look towards, then these were natural reasons for a case for a pause. But there are some trade-offs to consider. The regional emissions picture is, I think, a pretty key one. We have neighboring states and jurisdictions that are going to allow this development to happen. So if we outright ban or indefinitely ban, it's still going to happen and still going to be somewhere, and that is maybe not the best case regionally or even locally. Additionally, well-regulated centers paired with PPAs could be actually a net environmental benefit. Over some sort of grid storage or grid usage. And that's really the direction I think that we should be looking at in this study period. Also, we would lose a lot of leverage without having some sort of process or idea for these centers to come in. And then the final point is that the threshold calibration, so the bill speaks to 10 megawatt, but I think there needs to be further study as to what that actual threshold should be, how it should be determined, and sub-uses, like could someone just maybe open 2 8 megawatt locations next to each other to get around that sort of issue. So those are some base public health considerations I want to talk about before moving into the fiscal and economic considerations. So the Maryland Tech Council Stage Policy Group had analysis of an 800,000 square foot data center, and they showed around 18 million in state tax revenue, 5,000 construction jobs, 500 permanent jobs, and around 14 million annual revenue once operational. And so I believe these jobs numbers are much more of a multiplier effect calculation, because I know that there are some other reports that have different job numbers, either at a national stage or whatnot. But I think this is a pretty important thing to look at. Additionally, what's our fiscal case for pausing? Our community benefit agreements and things that make people happy, is that more important? Will sales tax exemptions and whatnot from the Maryland Data Center tax revenue incentive program that keeps us in this tier 1, is that going to actually result in a net loss, because we won't be really getting the property tax revenue that we'd be expecting? And then, of course, even once they are open, there's going to be a drop in employment there, but then what's around these data centers for the employees, if they need to go do things. And obviously we want to make sure that we have any sort of premature commitment around where these can be and where they can go. So I think those are really important fiscal considerations to bring in around this pause. And then now I want to get into section C, which talks about self-supplying energy. And so if they are supplying their own energy, what's the path to yes? And I think on-site solar, wind, gas, carbon capture, et cetera, to disconnect from the grid, which is something that we see in Texas, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Wyoming, are pretty key. The power purchase agreements, which I've been referencing a few times, are pretty useful. How can you get off of the grid? And if we can't use that, I still have RECs here because it's still a offset tool. Even though the energy is still being created, there's at least something we're getting out of it. And so, Colorado has a pretty solid hybrid model with this. And then even under self-supply, we still have to make sure that the noise, water consumption, and possible emergency generator use is addressed. And then what would the adequate offsets be? 100% of the electricity grid matched hourly, not annually. Having dedicated, renewables or verified self-supply, because like I just mentioned, RECs are not always alone. That said, I know that North Carolina, they used a Senate bill, I think it's 886 from 2018, I think, where the state gave them an 8 times multiplier for the first 200 megawatts of energy generated. So if we did go into the REC, then that would be a state coordination to ensure that we could get the best bang for our buck. And again, what's our ratepayer protection? How are we looking at and planning for water use and mitigation? And all of these things kind of boil down to transparency. We need to make sure that there is full disclosure from the end user or tenant, and that the communities that could be possibly impacted by this have community benefit agreements in place that at least they can also benefit from these types of projects. And then finally, I want to look at equity, because it's a bifurcated equity profile, really. There is the obvious upside of potential tax revenue, employment, et cetera, but the energy, water, and land uses often tend to land on overburdened red line neighborhoods. So it's something that we really need to make sure that during a potential period of study, there is targeted outreach with neighborhood associations, that we perform proper EJ, talk to labor unions, and then have that feedback inform a future regulatory framework. Staff is proposing that in this impact study that there's essentially 4 work streams to look at: an energy and grid impact, a fiscal impact, an environmental and public impact, and then a zoning and regulatory impact. All of these kind of come together, which is essentially what Singapore did, to look at ways that you don't outright ban, but you can work together to make it better for all parties. After the study, there are essentially 3 possible outcomes, where you either let the moratorium expire, you reenact or extend it, or you replace it with conditional use framework, in the table. And so as a result, staff recommendation is approval, with a recommendation that City Council direct Department of Planning in coordination with Department of Public Works, Department of Housing and Community Development, Commission on Sustainability, and the Department of Finance to conduct a comprehensive data center impact study during the moratorium period and return to the Planning Commission and City Council with findings and proposed zoning regulations prior to the bill's sunset. If legislation establishing permanent zoning regulations for data centers has not been enacted, prior to the termination of Section 2 of this ordinance, the prohibition on data centers established by Section 1209B shall remain in effect until such legislation is enacted. That is all I have. I know that was a lot, but thank you.
Thank you. No one's rushing you, by the way.
Sorry, I just talked fast.
Thank you for a very comprehensive, thoughtful presentation, and the same for the staff report upon which it's based. So we really appreciate the thought you put into it. I'm sure there will be questions, and you may be up and down as we go along here. Let me just sort of get a sense of what we have in the room. I think I would like to start. First of all, who here wishes to testify on the bill? Is it? And there's one online. So I see 2 gentlemen and in the back. Okay, good. Let's start with the testimony from the sponsor's representative explaining the bill. The lead sponsor of the bill is President Cohen, and we have a representative from his office to talk about that. So please introduce yourself, and we look forward to hearing from you.
There we go. Sorry, it's the opposite of the city council mics. So, good afternoon, Chair Laria, Vice Chair Stevenson, and honorable members of the Planning Commission. My name's Ethan Hasek. I serve as the Deputy Legislative Director for Council President Cohen. I want to begin by thanking Director Southard and Austin Davis for, as the chair said, a really thoughtful and comprehensive staff report on this bill. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Baltimore Development Corporation, who similarly submitted a really deeply researched and thoroughly considered report. Some other input and testimony received to acknowledge. Former Commissioner Previs submitted a letter. I know the Maryland Tech Council, who I think is represented today, and Jason and our friends from the building trades. I actually don't know if you're here for this item, but I know this is an issue that's very impactful for the building trades. So thank you for your interest, and looking forward to partnering with you all in this conversation as well. Since I'm fortunate to follow Austin's presentation, I'm going to refrain from summarizing the bill and instead speak to the general intent. I also hope to proactively answer some common questions, including questions raised in the planning report, or the staff report, and the BDC report. Since 2023, Council President Cohen has fought consistently against BGE's excessive distribution rate hikes. Every day, our office hears from residents, small businesses, and houses of worship that simply cannot afford their BGE bills. The data backs this up. A recent study from Johns Hopkins published earlier this year found that over half of Baltimore households with children missed at least one utility payment in the past 12 months. And comparative data suggests that Baltimoreans, and particularly the lowest income Baltimoreans, have among the highest energy cost burdens in the United States. We're really at a breaking point with this. Data centers drive up the cost of electricity in two different ways. Austin noted the first one. They drive up the peak demand on the grid, which raises the supply cost. But there's actually a second mechanism that's more relevant to data centers located in Baltimore City specifically. When a data center requires new local transmission infrastructure to be built, we, as the ratepayers, pay for that transmission infrastructure with interest. As the BDC notes in their report, the data center, and Austin noted it as well, the data center industry is exploding. There were more than 550 new data center projects announced in 2025 alone. If you look at the PJM, our regional grid forecasts, Maryland's peak electricity demand is expected to increase by 12% by 2036. If you remove data centers from that forecast, it only increases by 1%. So like the vast majority of that increase due to data centers alone. And yet, our zoning code has no mention of data centers. If a data center were to apply for permits, it's not clear in our zoning code the use category under which it would be approved. That's why the City Council is tackling this issue now. And the Council President believes that in a rapidly evolving field, the best place to start and the best place to protect Baltimoreans is a one-year moratorium. As staff noted, this is a rational and reasonable approach aligned with our neighbors and with jurisdictions across the country, even around the world. You might wonder why we're proposing a one-year moratorium as opposed to a shorter or longer one. I'd like to note some key milestones that we expect to come in the next year that relate to energy affordability specifically. By September 1 of this year, the State Department of Legislative Services is required to submit the final version of a statewide study on data center impacts. And we expect that that study will likely generate further data center regulation in the 2027 General Assembly session. That same date, September 1, is the deadline for utilities, including BG&E, to submit to the PSC proposed rate schedules for large load customers. And then those rate schedules will then need PSC approval, which will take some additional time. These rate schedules are intended to require large load customers, including data centers, to pay the full cost of the electricity they demand. And finally, there are ongoing negotiations between governors in the PJM area, the Trump administration, and PJM over how the grid handles data centers. Earlier this year, the White House and the governors got together to call on PJM to hold an emergency auction intended to address the data center issue, and they called on that to happen by September 2026. Just a few days ago, PJM agreed to hold this auction, but it turns out that auction won't take place now until March 2027. So a lot happening in a year. With that year, we have time to assess these rapidly changing conditions and develop comprehensive use standards that are appropriate to protect Baltimoreans, who I'll note already experience disproportionate energy costs and environmental health burdens. The other question you might ask is why we're setting the floor of what qualifies as a data center at 10 megawatts. I've read the concerns in some of the letters and reports that at 10 megawatts, we'll have the unintended consequence of banning new on-site IT infrastructure. That is not the intent, and I'd like to present evidence that demonstrates that the bill as written adequately conveys the intent. First, the staff report notes that the 10 megawatt floor, and I quote, deliberately targets large commercial scale or hyperscale facilities, those consuming the equivalent of thousands of homes worth of energy, and would not affect smaller in-building server rooms or institutional information technology infrastructure commonly found in offices, hospitals, and universities. I would actually go even further and suggest that the 10 megawatt floor is pretty conservative, especially in an urban context. And Eric, if you could pull up the slides, I'd like to share some real world examples of data centers capable of consuming between 10 and 25 megawatts, which is the floor that the state has now set as kind of the floor for what it considers a large load customer. So to begin, thank you so much, Eric. I'll start with an example out of Oklahoma City. You have a 10 megawatt facility that contains 4 million transistors and 900,000 AI cores, which corresponds to 44 exaflops of computing power. That's all contained within an 82,000 square foot facility. That's just about the size, I measured it, compared it, of a downtown block, like between Pratt and Lombard Street, major streets on either side. In the middle, clocking in at 17 megawatts, you have a 180,000 square foot facility that's under development in Sterling, Virginia, so-called data center alley. You can see on the map, overhead map view here, I think I have the laser. It's not quite working, but, oh, okay. It's larger than the Wegmans supermarket across the street. If folks aren't from Western New York like me, Wegmans is about as large as supermarkets get. And then for the upper end, Austin took us to Singapore. I'm going to take us to Indonesia. You have the Edge 2 facility, which is a 15-story, 408,000 square foot structure that houses a 23 megawatt data center. It's difficult for me to fathom on-site IT infrastructure that takes up as much or more space than an entire city block. Finally, I'd like to note that we agree with the BDC that what happens during the year-long moratorium is very important. And that's why we're very willing to incorporate the suggestion from both staff and the BDC to include a study provision in the bill. And particularly, we're grateful for the willingness from both parties to lead the effort. Indeed, where we intend to land is a set of comprehensive conditional use standards that address not just energy, but all of the ways that data centers impact our communities. We ask for the Commission to approve this bill. We welcome the inclusion of the study provision, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Hasek regarding the sponsor's position, president's position, or anything that he's testified to? We can come back to them if people have questions, but are there any at the moment? Okay. All right, well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Please stand by. Let me call, before I call people up to add additional testimony, I just want to call attention, some references have been made. The commission has, and these are posted publicly, 3 written sets of comments. There is a memorandum from the Baltimore Development Corporation summarizing its view regarding the bill, making some observations, making some recommendations. That's been referred to. I just want to say on the record, Mr. Welly, I guess you'll be coming up here. This is a really, really well-done memo and very, very helpful. So thank you for BDC taking this seriously and for making these very helpful recommendations, which I'm sure will also ultimately inform the council's discussion. There's also a letter to us from the Maryland Tech Council, which has is generally support. It's hard to characterize other people's letters, and they don't characterize themselves as either supportive or objection or whatever. But they just so folks have a feel. There's some concern about the megawattage. This issue about what's an appropriate threshold. There's some concern expressed about whether a year moratorium. I think they seem to be suggesting maybe a 6-month one. And they offer to serve as a resource. Again, I'm not suggesting that represents everything in the letter. It's posted publicly, but that's the couple of essential things. We also have a memorandum, a letter to us from Mr. Thomas Previs, who I know is here and I think will testify. And since I know he's here, I'll just let him summarize or amplify his testimony. But that letter is also in the record as well. If there are no other questions at the moment, I'm going to ask folks to come up and testify. And I think is anybody from the Tech Council here? No, okay. Oh, you are? Okay, great. Well, let's start with Mr. Welly from BDC. Mr. Welly, will you come up and, you're planning to testify on behalf of BDC, correct? Yeah. Thanks. Just introduce for the green light.
Oh, yeah, it is the opposite of council. All right. Good afternoon, Chair Laria, members of the commission. Thank you, Tom Welly, Chief of Staff at Baltimore Development Corporation. Again, you've got President Rowley's memo, and I was happy to see some of our concerns addressed both by the Council President's office as well as in the staff report there. So again, just wanted to reiterate some of our points. Generally, just a little concerned with the definition and some of the parameters of this moratorium. So again, the 10 megawatt threshold sort of has been debated here, and our recommendation was that that be increased to be in line with the bill that was similarly introduced at the state level. Also, I believe Baltimore County has a similar bill for consideration or possibly passed, but the 25 megawatt threshold being something that, you know, most non-scale data centers would not achieve. And again, the definition of data center maybe even just being changed to have a principal use being the storage, transfer, and collection of data. The intent here from BDC's standpoint is that other projects and enterprises that aren't the sole focus of this bill don't get wrapped up into this legislation, any potential moratorium, any future legislation or prohibited use, so that we don't unintentionally capture, other enterprises. We want to be pro-business. Baltimore's open for business, right? We want to make sure that the definition is a little bit more focused and more narrowly defined, so that we're not sending a signal, and so that future developments can't be rolled up into this, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or opposed by people who don't agree with a potential development. So again, even a couple of fixes, raising the threshold for power consumption, defining a data center as something that has a principal use for again, that collection and transfer and storage, those types of things, and was very happy to see. So again, those are some of the definitional changes that we would recommend, just to make sure that we are only catching what we want to catch in here, which would be the large, hyperscale data centers. Very happy to see that a study period was included in the staff report. That was another one of our recommendations. I think, we do need to be mindful of what we do during that moratorium. A 1-year pause is not going to mean that Baltimore is passed by the entire data center industry, but how we come out of that moratorium is very important. We need to have some defined parameters so that investors will see that there is a level of certainty, so that that their projects are not open to interpretation, that we are united in our definition and in what is going to be possible. So very glad to see that the study period is put in there, and also very happy to volunteer BDC services in collaboration with whatever that study may be. Happy to lend a hand there. Beyond that, I think, again, just worrying about even, if a building were to potentially just try to convert all of its power usage to electric, it may cross that 10 megawatt threshold. I think there's a relative amount of uncertainty in terms of what 10 megawatts is in this context. And again, a large research and development facility, anything educational, anything that does manufacturing that also stores data. We've got Nature Cell Biotech coming to town, a Korean biotech firm that's making a huge $400 million investment, I believe, in Gaslight Square, 100,000 square feet, many jobs. I don't know what their power consumption is going to be. I know they're going to be collecting and using data, but that is very much not a data center. That's going to be manufacture and research. So just wanting to make sure that, again, nothing other than the intended focus of this bill is included. And so I think just changing some of the definitions would really be able to address that significantly. And again, the study period, very happy to see that. So just reiterating what's in the memo, and happy to take any questions. I definitely want to volunteer BDC services for any study period on economic impact and other things of that nature.
Are there questions of Mr. Welly? Let me start with one. I just want to make sure. So fundamentally, BDC, as our economic development agency, does not see a one-year moratorium as somehow harmful in the broad sense to our sort of economic position with respect to this industry. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, as long as that one-year moratorium is used thoughtfully and in the correct way, and that we come out of that one-year moratorium. I mean, this is a good time. This is a popular time to be jumping up and down on data centers. I understand that, and I think that study is warranted. There are a lot of questions that we aren't sure are answered satisfactorily at the moment to just approve a big hyperscale data center. But we want to be sure that in that period of time, we are studying. We want to be sure, again, another recommendation that we had is that if the city receives a proposal for such a data center, that the planning and site review, all the normal processes for construction are still going on, so that the moratorium doesn't include, obviously not approval of that process because we'd be in the moratorium period, but processing, plan review, all of those things. Obviously, we've got quite a significant backlog in terms of permitting right now, so we wouldn't want somebody who were to come to town with this as an interest to have to wait out the year-long moratorium and then start the plan review process, which would certainly be significant in terms of time and opportunity costs, because this is not just a simple combo permit that's going to be applied for in this instance, right? This is going to be a big deal. So again, encouraging that we keep the wheels moving during this moratorium, both in study and with entertaining any potential developments that do come our way.
And
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
with respect to the megawattage question, are you suggesting that you feel uncomfortable with that sort of ultimately, meaning in a study period, you'd be sitting at the table saying, it shouldn't be 10, it should be 15, 25, 25 to 40, whatever it is? Or are you suggesting that you're concerned about it during the study period? In other words, can we live for a year with 10 megawatts? Or are you concerned, and as long as you feel like there's a serious discussion within that year that leads us to whatever number the mayor and city council ultimately think is the right number?
I think that our position is that we haven't seen evidence that 10 megawatts, I mean, I've heard conflicting opinions that 10 megawatts is too much and not enough.
Right.
That tells me that we don't have our arms fully around what 10 megawatts means, what else 10 megawatts can be used for. Does this building use 10 megawatts? I don't exactly know, probably not, but those are things that need to be part of that study. So while I think the moratorium would be fine, I can't say specifically if we would be okay with 10 megawatts being in the moratorium period, or if we would like to see that raised to 25, yeah. But that I know that 25 was introduced at the state level in Baltimore County as well. And I think in the interest of consistency, that we would like to see that raised to 25, but in that study period, certainly drilling down on the actual power use that is acceptable for all other functions, research, development, manufacturing, anything, even a building that again wants to go fully electric, so that we are not accidentally wrapping up anything that's not a hyperscale data center.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I'm struggling with the megawattage issue is because I don't know the answer, and I'm sure that I'm not going to know the answer by the time we vote on this. And therefore, my concern is, ultimately, it has to get sorted out. But is that something that we can live with for a year or not? Because it's in the bill right now. Right. And if the answer is we can live with it for a year, but we better be talking about it because it might be the wrong number by the time we get to the expiration of a moratorium. It just changes a little bit how we might approach this. It's a little circular. It's sort of like, you want to have if you put it in the bill now, but you're going to study it potentially to figure out whether it's correct or not, so.
I would say that if we are worried about it being not the right number, then it should be a bigger number, so that many other functions do not fall into that category and aren't considered during the moratorium process.
Understood.
I think it's better safe than sorry, raising the number, and again, just having seen what was introduced in other bodies, being at 25, consistency with that seems good, and obviously 25 is quite a bit higher
Yeah.
than 10, so I think we would prefer to see that raised.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, you had a question, I think?
Yeah, I suppose I did. Oh, my question was about, you insinuated that there should be plan reviews and keep other wheels moving during the moratorium. Is that not the opposite of what the effect of a moratorium, just so I understand, isn't that exactly what a moratorium would freeze?
From our standpoint, if at the end of the moratorium projects, we decide to go ahead, we have studied this sufficiently and we're okay with a theoretical project that we have received, or we have a framework that a project falls into, we start the moratorium, and on the first day of the moratorium, we get interest, we get plans, we get things like that, and then we put them in a drawer for a year until such a time as the moratorium is over. Then we're okay with it. And then we're a full year behind already of a plan review process that would likely take most of a year to begin with.
So I understand what you're saying, and so on that last point is where I don't know if that process makes any sense to me, because if you applied tomorrow, it would take you a year to get a permit for such a complicated project. So the idea of doing a moratorium but having them shovel ready at the end of it seems like a much ado about nothing. On the other side of that, if you did have a project that was 90% designed, nearly ready to go, and we do this study, presumably in the year there would be new guidelines, regulations, et cetera. So, you'd be going back and redesigning and starting that process at the end of the moratorium. So just while we're, thinking about the impact of this, I think that we should just kind of be clear about, in my view, how that practically would play out.
Certainly, and I think, from our standpoint, again, not going so far as to approve anything, so maybe not getting quite to shovel ready, but a review process or anything that would normally happen, because the result of the moratorium is not decided yet. And so just from our standpoint, trying to be pro-business, pro-development, we wouldn't want to signal to investors that they would have to wait a year and then start the plan review process if they had something ready to at least start some of the process without making any final decisions or anything that would tie us to anything. We feel like it would be good practice for the city to sort of at least start the ball rolling. And I don't have a set stage of the plan review process where I think that should stop, obviously, well short of final approval, well short of getting shovel ready, with the understanding that anybody who were to apply for a potential project during this moratorium is certainly going to eventually be subject to the findings of the study during the moratorium period and whatever the final decision is of the commission and the council.
I would just say, Mr. Vice Chair, that, and others, I think there are two separate questions here. One is a question of sort of what our intent is with respect to what we're trying to do. And I think it's a legitimate question about whether the idea of letting something go through a process, but saying, look, it's basically proceed at your own risk sort of concept, right?
Certainly.
Now, it's not entirely proceed at your own risk, because you're taking up, staff time, and it's not like it's cost-free to the city. Admittedly, there's much more cost presumably to an applicant, because they have to prepare all sorts of plans in order to go through a process. And it's proceed at your own risk, because you may not actually be able to get a building permit for this thing. The narrow question, which is that I think if that's what we want to do, if that's what we and or the council want to do, I think we have to be very explicit about it, because what I would say, the data center's definition resides in a fairly short list of prohibited uses in all zoning districts. And I'll just take sort of a really an unpopular one, say, crude oil terminal. It's the first one on the list. If someone came to us today and said, I want to do a crude oil, terminal, I think we just want to go through the process, because in the meantime, we're going to try and get crude oil terminals permitted. We'd say, we're not going to do that. It's prohibited. I know this is a little different because it's subject to a moratorium. It's not like a 20-year prohibition in the zoning code. The others, for the record, by the way, are crude oil terminals, incinerators, junk or scrap storage in yards, nuclear power plants, solid waste sanitary landfills. There's a whole longer definition about storage, and vehicle dismantling facilities. Those are prohibited in all districts. So I just think, I think we can have a discussion about whether we think, or ultimately the council thinks, that it makes sense to provide a specific sort of path that says, in this moratorium environment, you can proceed, quote, at your own risk, whatever that means. I'm afraid if it's not provided for, then I think it's hard to justify that otherwise. So I'm just raising that as kind of a somewhat technical point in terms of what we might recommend and what the council might do. Mr. McCoach.
Your point is a good point. I found myself asking, ultimately, there will be data centers in Baltimore City in some form or fashion after the moratorium. So I found myself thinking, we're going to, in an effort here to actually prohibit a specific use, why wouldn't we just put a hold on building permits and not have to then change the prohibition? I actually like the conditional use approach, but I just think, is there a simpler way to do this for such a temporary period of time? And that's an open question.
Well, okay, let's put a pin in that. That's a very good question. Are there other questions for Mr. Welly before we move on to other testimony? Sort of accumulate here. Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Welly, but don't leave. And I think we're going to move to the Maryland.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Maryland Tech Council, gentlemen, please come on up. And I'm sorry if I didn't fully characterize your letter, so I'm glad you're here to explain.
Am I good here? Okay.
Yes.
And actually, for the record, Andrew Zirkle, Government Relations for the Maryland Tech Council. I actually didn't have any prepared remarks today, but just wanted to clarify a little bit from our letter. It was more of an informational testimony whereby we wanted to flag some of the concerns that we had with the legislation, but still wanted to indicate, we're willing to support the councilman in terms of working on this bill, making sure that we're in a posture where development can occur at some point in the city responsibly. It was pointed to in the staff report our SAGE economic analysis that showed some of the both workforce and revenue benefits that come with data centers. And we'd like to encourage the evaluation of that as sort of, as both the commission and others evaluate the whole picture when it comes to data centers. I'd also like to echo the comments of BDC where we think the 10 megawatt threshold is a little too low. The state has done a lot of work in terms of defining large load customers, and they did land on 25 megawatts this session. Actually, up until this session, before this session, it was at 100 megawatts. So 10 is much lower than you see in a lot of other jurisdictions and a lot of other states. One other thing that I'd like to bring up sort of in the conversation of electricity and energy use is the council president's staff in his presentation had some wonderful examples of data centers between 10 and 25 megawatts and sort of talking about what does the footprint of one of those look like in a community. There isn't like a one-to-one, like this is what a 10 megawatt data center looks like. This is what a 25 megawatt data center looks like. Some of these data centers are more intensive in their energy use, and therefore this 10 megawatt data center may have a smaller footprint. And likewise, you may have a data center that's a little bit less intensive and has a wider footprint. A lot of it depends on the type of activity that it's carrying out, maybe the cooling system that it has. So I would just say, in addition to us sort of recommending that we stick with the state on what a data center threshold is, I would also caution the use of electricity usage as kind of like a proxy for footprint of like what's too large for a community, what's too small for a community. Also, I would second that it would make sense to, during this moratorium, allow planning processes to go forward without any final approvals. That's something that we've seen in other jurisdictions as well. Baltimore County, they recently had a data center moratorium enacted, and they permitted that to continue. Frederick County, at various times during their planning processes, halted permitting approvals, but still allowed the permitting process to take place. So it's something that's pretty common in other jurisdictions, and it sends a signal that, hey, this is a community that is working to get the guardrails correct, but it doesn't send a signal, if you're halting things entirely, that may drive away potential projects, potential investment that could meet, that guardrailed criteria down the line. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and obviously we're happy to serve as a resource to both the commission and to the sponsor as we move forward on this legislation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to write and to appear. Are there questions for the gentleman? Okay. I think the other person who's wished to testify is Mr. Previs. Mr. Previs, if you come on up.
Hello, everyone.
Mr. Previs, a former member of the Planning Commission.
It's an honor to be here again. It's been maybe 3 years now. It's good to see some
Is it better or
old
worse to
friends.
be on that side of the podium, Mr. Previs?
I was just thinking about that. I enjoyed my time on the commission so much, and I learned so much. And I've also enjoyed my time not on the commission, so I can do things like this and, don't have to hear every possible conditional by ordinance request. I actually echo a lot of the comments here. I think the problem, so in the last decade, I've spent a lot of time doing infrastructure development, wastewater treatment plants, power plants, the offshore wind project, and now data centers, battery storage, which is another big project that's coming now. And they have a different profile because the local communities tend to hate them, but the rest of the world, including everyone in the local communities, want to turn their lights on, want to flush the toilets, and I know for a fact that all of us are going to want to use AI. And if we've tried already, we've seen how exciting and what the possibilities are for planning our day or whatever it is, and it's still developing. I really have a strong concern, having been on the zoning side and also as a project developer lawyer, and not for anyone that has any plan in the city, to be clear, that this moratoriums is really sending the wrong message. And these kind of echoing some of the comments already today. What's going to happen is you've got the Mag 7 type companies investing enormous amounts of money into David centers right now, and they're getting beat up by the market because they're not returning enough to shareholders, and there's these enormous capital expenditures, and then you've got a lot of developers running around looking for these deals. If there's incredible competition to get these deals, and and you can go anywhere in the country and get these deals. And of course, putting something in the middle of Texas has a lot of appeal for a lot of the reasons that you would know are different than Baltimore City. But if you put a one-year moratorium, and I've also worked for the financing of these projects, and you put a one-year moratorium on it, I feel fairly certain that you're just going, like, it's pie in the sky to think you're going to send someone through a maybe we'll allow it, maybe we won't process, and they're going to spend a lot of money on people like me and all kinds of other approvals where it's a moratorium and it's just strictly prohibited. Commissioner McCoach's idea is a lot closer to what I think would work, and I feel like we already know this. This is not, it's not so, a data center is not so revolutionary. The environmental issues are there. There's water, there may be air. If it's got a power plant attached to it, it may have a heat issue. We have a lot of industrial uses in the city. We have an incinerator, we've got Patapsco, we've got the medical incinerator. Now, granted, they all have their own issues too, but we have industrial zoning, we have heavy industrial zoning, and we have conditional uses. And if we were to approve, I actually think a good idea, which I think is along the lines of what Commissioner McCoach said, would be to approve it as a conditional use, like immediately approve it as a conditional use in a heavy industrial area or something, the most heavy area. Show that Baltimore's open for business. Maybe develop the conditional use regulations and guidelines over the course of the year, but don't say it's prohibited. I think the second you say it's prohibited, there's no way anything happens in the year where it's prohibited. And the development and the money's just going to wait until it's not prohibited and then try. And at that point, you're way behind the 8 ball. And all these other counties and communities and wherever else they can put it have taken advantage of it. And the tax revenue, having also sat on your side in the capital campaign, in the capital budget, I mean, the tax revenue is really substantial, and it's really likely to accrue directly to Baltimore and be able to go to its general budget. And I made a general comment about a $250 million center, generating like $5 million a year in revenue. Those are numbers I, just kind of made up, but that's like the idea. That would be the percentage, and you would use that money. So I think I understand the need, kind of the political desire. It's also, doing a lot of infrastructure projects. It's very easy for local communities to say no to an infrastructure project. It's sort of a knee-jerk reaction. But it ends up being a problem in time. And in this particular case, a lot of revenue could come from it. And we're in a lot of competition with nearby communities, and we're just going to miss the opportunity. I feel strongly that a moratorium misses the opportunity. The better thing to do would be to do something like Commissioner McCoach and I are sort of suggesting. I think just stick it in heavy industry, make it a conditional use, have a process that people can take to their banks and say, we've got a process, and they're working on it. One other thing is a lot of what was said is outside the scope of zoning. The power grid is outside the scope of zoning. In reality, air permits are outside the scope of zoning. They're federal permits. To a large extent, water permits are outside the scope of zoning, although water use, I would say, is within the scheme of Baltimore's powers. A lot of this is going to happen at the Maryland legislative level. A lot of this is going to happen at the federal level. The shovel's not going in the ground this year, even if it were to start today. And if you put the prohibition on, it's definitely not going in the ground at the end of the year, because the process can only start at the end of the year because people can't convince Amazons or their financiers to even start while a prohibition's on. So my strong recommendation is that you don't make it a prohibition. That word is really ugly. The city already has a bit of a reputation for being kind of unfriendly to business, particularly on big projects that involve a lot, like billion-dollar capital investments, and that you look to show opportunity to the outside world, and then allow the process to play out over the course of the year, because nothing's going in the ground in a year. With that, I think that's basically the scope of my testimony, but I do really encourage you to look on the revenue side and not just on the community reaction side.
Thanks. Mr. Cruz, I mean, I don't know, at some point, people are going to have to sort this out, but I mean, it's not a prohibition, it's a moratorium. And then you may say, practically, it's the same thing that's being proposed. But the one specific question I have for you is, I think I can't imagine a situation in which a data center is simply permitted. It's going to end up at best, if you want to call it best, conditional. I think everybody has said that. And it would probably be conditional in the sense of not a generic conditional use, but a conditional use as there are a series in the code that say, for this particular use, these are the specific things you need to look at. And the staff could remind us, and what there's a bunch of things, as you well know, which require specific findings. So, and I think that both our staff and I think the council president's office, I forget which one, talked about what kinds of things those would be, and they seem rational, so if we went down the path of conditional, it's like, again, I'm struggling with the circularity of it, meaning, okay, let's assume we make it conditional, we decide that that's a good path, we want to make it conditional, how do we figure that out? We should have a study, but if we have a study, we can't do it today. So, I mean, I'm having a hard time getting out of the loop of like, don't we need some time to figure this out, even if your bias or your ultimate goal, and frankly, I think I heard the president's office say that their intention, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you talked about a conditional use process, and that the goal of the sponsor anyway, I mean, ultimately the city, by ordinance will do what it does, but the goal of the sponsor is not a prohibition. The goal of the sponsor is managing it via some sort of conditional use process. At least that's been injected into the discussion. So that's what I think is complicated here.
It is I don't know if it's a solution. I have a thought, which is the way that Maryland has dealt with the battery storage issue, which is brand new also. They passed the legislation. And now, see, I don't know, because we don't do regulations the way, we can do regulations. There's nothing preventing it. And I think a conditional use, I don't know, you'd have to check the law, but it might be able to be a regulatory action as opposed to an ordinance. But the way this they would say, the Public Service Commission, you're going to have battery storage. We're going to treat it this way. You know, within a year, you're going to come up with the regulations on battery storage. And then those are going to become, you know, once those regulations are promulgated, they'll be the effective ones for the future of that. And that has worked. And actually, quite frankly, a lot of battery storage projects are coming online, and they're very beneficial, and they're doing really good work at brownfields and things too. And it was a process. Now, the Public Service Commission is drinking from the fire hose too. The legislator just dumped it on their lap, and they're like, but they came up with the regulations. They were just, the bill passed last April. It was just promulgated end of March. So now there are the CPCN regulations are in effect. There's regulations to do battery storage, and people are applying for that. All of a sudden, it's coming hot and fast. So there's a way to do it. But I think if they were to say, if Maryland had taken a different approach, said no battery storage for a year, we have to figure this out, then there just wouldn't have been any development in a year. But by doing it that way, they opened the door, investors came in, and then the investors participated at the Public Service Commission, and the rules were written together by people with expertise, with balancing the community and the developer's interests. And so, if a process like that could be followed, I think it'd be much more beneficial.
Okay, fair enough. Other questions for Mr. Previs? Okay, so thank you very much. We appreciate it. Is there anybody else here who wishes to testify? I'll get anybody who has not testified who wishes to testify. And there's one online? Yes, thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Ambrose. I'm business agent for Plumbers and Steam Fitters Local 486. First, I'd like to thank staff on all their hard work. I'd thank the sponsor for his work on it as well. I'd like to echo a lot of the sentiment that the tech councils put out already. They do a lot of good work for this industry across the state. I would like to point out that some of the things that were pointed to during staff recommendations were echoing stuff from, I believe, Indonesia, Singapore. There's a lot of good work that's being going on all around the state, namely in Frederick County, where a lot of our work is going on right now. Currently have 250 steam fitters and plumbers out there working 6 to 7 days a week. It's a lot of good paying jobs for a lot of people. And that's just across 2 data centers. The 1 year moratorium seems a bit excessive, especially with I know the way planning and permitting goes. A year-long delay on top of planning and permitting is going to be excessive, especially for a lot of developers, and especially with a lot of the public sentiment that's going around on these data centers, which, a couple of the things in staff's report were a little bit not accurate 100%. So I just want to get out here and make sure that you guys know that the building trades are here, and if there is going to be a study, if there is a moratorium and there needs to be a study and a work group, labor has participated in that, tech council has participated in that in Frederick County to make sure that, community benefit is achieved in these projects, but also that, that people know what is actually being done at these facilities, closed loop systems, how much water really is being used, how much electricity is really being used, what the backup generators actually produce, how much new technology is being used on these from even a year ago. The amount of upgraded technology that's being used on these is mind-blowing. So you may set guidelines now during this moratorium or whatever, and by the time you go through planning and all this stuff, they may have already exceeded it, what you want. So I just wanted to echo those sentiments.
Thank you, sir. Questions for the?
Ambrose, A-M-B-R-O-S-E.
Okay, no questions? Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who has not testified or wishes to testify? Hearing that, I'm going to close the public testimony. That's why there's someone online. I always forget if I'm not looking at them. I apologize. Mr. Tiso.
That's fine. Caroline Hecker was here but had to sign off, and she says, I have to sign off, but this bill strikes me as a classic case of well-intended legislation having unintended consequences. What I was going to say was covered by Mr. Welly. The bill does not actually include an exclusion or exception for smaller in-building server rooms or institutional informational technology infrastructure commonly found in offices, hospitals, and universities. The bill should refer to the principal use of the facility being for storage, processing, distribution of data. As drafted, it would categorize any large office building that stores, processes, and distributes data and uses 10 megawatts of electricity as a, quote, data center, end quote, which surely is not the intent. And her comments were from 159, so she didn't have the benefit of the last 15 minutes, but those are her comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tiso. Okay, once again, I'm going to close the new testimony. We're going to keep, we'll keep at it here. So I'm going to close the public testimony, and Mr. Hasek, did you want to stand up again? And yeah, and you're welcome to do that, of course, please.
It's green. Green is go. Okay,
Green
great.
means go.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Ambrose and Building Trains, and Ray, I saw you're here as well. I just wanted to affirm two things to start. One, yes, conditional use is where we want to land. Totally understand the benefits, particularly to labor notes early. And I think the commitment that the council president and I have made to Ray and the building trades is absolutely to have them involved in that study process throughout the year. And while that's not in the bill, and we're, like, as I've mentioned to the commission, we're very, very open to adding it, as the intent that the council president has expressed from the start is for this to include a study and land in a place where we have standards. I think the second thing that I wanted to address is the question of the temporary, or I forgot the phrasing, but these could still be considered during the one-year moratorium. I'd have to discuss that a bit more with the council president and mull that over. It's not a question we'd considered. I would say, though, as a first principle, I was working in the then councilman's office and now the council president's office since 2022, and kind of a day one first principle in city government. As we work to make city government more open to business, we thank the commission for your help with the housing, some of the work we've done in the housing package, also continued work on permitting to that effect. But yeah, anyway, just to not overpromise to folks, particularly when it comes to extensive investment. So I really would not want folks to be in a position where they've put in an application for something that they're betting a lot on, only to have the process land in a place where what they're proposing would not be permitted under the conditional use standards for any number of reasons. Next, why I think there were some comments to the effect of data centers being, why they're different from other uses. And just to recap, rapidly proliferating in this moment, unlike other large load users. And there are a multitude of impacts. Also, the state policy environment is evolving to address this, but the electricity impacts in particular are concerning at this moment, where, as I mentioned, Baltimoreans simply can't afford their utility bills. Finally, I want to address the 10 megawatt floor, which I anticipated would be a source of discussion and has indeed been one. It's absolutely right that the floor was lowered from 100 megawatts to 25 megawatts this year. What that means is that if you have, my concern basically, our concern with raising the floor to 25 megawatts, especially during the 1 year period, is that it would almost, and as you've seen, these aren't meant to be comprehensive examples, but there are real examples of data centers with all the accompanying impacts coming in that are between the 10 and 25 megawatt threshold. I would worry that you almost incentivize those to come in before potentially there are more comprehensive regulations and conditional use standards introduced a year later. And in terms of unintended consequences, I've expressed this to institutional partners I've discussed with, and would ask of the commission and anyone else, please bring examples to our attention, specific example. We have named specific data centers that are in the 10 to 25 megawatt range. It would be helpful to know if there are specific use cases that we are excluding that we don't intend to exclude, and if the language needs to change in some way to more narrowly tailor, very open to that, but we strongly believe it would be a mistake to raise that floor to 25 megawatts or even higher. I think that's everything for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Please.
Mr. Vice Chair.
So to me, it seems to me that this is all about energy. That's obviously been mentioned, but other things have also been mentioned, and to me, it just seems to boil down to energy.
I say primarily, not entirely.
I understand that that's your position. I guess what I'm saying is that that's kind of the hook for me, because I think some of the other things, to the extent that these buildings are big and ugly, like we're not banning distribution centers,
Sure.
which are also big and ugly. To the extent, it's been said that there are other large load power users. So if the intent is to regulate power, I wonder why we don't regulate power. And the point also is made, it's interesting because this is not a use. This is really, I think, interesting dynamic, because this is not a use that people are opposed to. Everyone uses the cloud. Everyone, uses AI. Not dissimilar to the crude oil terminal and the nuclear power plant that are on that prohibited list. So as different as this is, it's an interesting parallel. I think it should be said that if the goal of this is to protect ratepayers, I don't see any correlation or guarantee that by banning data centers that BGE is not going to continue to increase rates. So that seems like we're kind of leveraging a really sensitive subject right now to make almost what could amount to a false promise of protecting rates. And then additionally, BGE is a regional utility, so I don't know the answer to this, but I wonder, does a data center in Anne Arundel County or Howard County affect our power rates any less than one that's here? John.
Yeah, let me do my best to respond to those questions. Yeah, so my understanding is that any local transmission infrastructure within the service area would contribute to what we pay in terms of the transmission part of the bill. And then, as I mentioned, this affects two different pieces of the bill. There's the transmission for the locally transmission, and then for the supply cost, that's kind of determined by PJM, which is the grid. But as that peak demand on the grid goes up, the cost of electricity goes up. Just as has already been mentioned, this is the vast costs to ratepayers have already been quantified. And it just, if you look at the load growth over the next 10 years, it's almost entirely attributable to data centers. There's just no other use that's coming close. And you're correct that the mechanism through which BGE seeks to increase the rates, the distribution rates before the Public Service Commission, is a parallel, separate process. But at the end of the day, they are both things that we're pushing back against. And when folks can't afford their bills, we just feel it's important to be able to come at the supply side, come at the transmission side, and come at the distribution side. But you're absolutely right, Mr. Vice Chair, that this does not preclude BGE from raising distribution rates, this action alone. But this is not the only action we're taking on the subject.
Thanks.
What is a little unusual about the situation is there's actually, there's really not that much disagreement about the ultimate outcome we want. We're actually just trying to figure out how to manage the next period while we figure it out. And some people would say, and there's just no perfect answer. Some people would say, if you overregulate during this period, you can cause harm during this period. And other people say, if you underregulate during this period, who knows what the heck's going to happen in the next year. But there really isn't a lot. It doesn't mean there won't be complex discussions around what's an appropriate condition for conditional use. But, it's really a relatively, I think, sort of relatively oddly, a very sort of narrow question that we're wrestling with right here today. And the 1025 watt thing is confusing, but let me just ask you this question. if the basic principle, and I'll say this for everybody because not everybody may be familiar, if the basic principle is that if it's not permitted in the zoning code, it's prohibited. I think that's an axiom of the sort of zoning law, right? If it's not permitted, it's prohibited, and it's not currently defined. So if we raised, I mean, and ultimately the council's going to do what the council's going to do here. So I don't want to belabor this too much, but if we raised it to 25 watts, which is not an arbitrary number because it is coming from, from this discussion at the state level. So a data center at 20 megawatts would still be prohibited. I mean, your concern is if you go too high, something can slip in underneath.
Yes.
That's the idea, which is, I understand the concern.
I brought
But how could it slip in underneath if you don't have a defined use that satisfies the data center at 20 megawatts? It's prohibited not explicitly, it's prohibited implicitly because the law says if you haven't permitted it, then it's prohibited. There's no use. You can't stick it in a category, so you can't do it anyway.
Actually, I left it at my chair, but I wonder if I
Of
brought some
course.
of the use categories that I want.
Of course.
I think our position upon reading the zoning code is that and I agree with the general principle, if it's not permitted, it's prohibited. I think reading the use categories, there was a concern in particular that, and again, I want to caveat, I'm not a land use attorney, but it seems to me that under the industrial categories, it is indeed referring to physical goods. Under the research and development category, however, I could see an applicant making the case that it falls under that category. And that's actually, and this is discussed in the BDC bill, I don't think this is a point that we've discussed yet. There's, the bill does explicitly say that research and development does not include a data center. And that is indeed, and the report properly attributes this as an effort to close the loophole. So we're really just trying to do everything we can to close the loophole here.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, I think we need to have some discussion and try and reach a conclusion, at least from the commission's perspective. Thank you, and we may ask anybody to come back up if the commission has a specific question, but I think it's time to hear at least preliminary thoughts from the commission. And Commissioner Allen, can I start down on your end and work this way?
Well, my first thought is to say that I'm glad that that the council has the final vote on this. Being frank. Because I see benefits in both sides of the argument. You want to know how we're inclined to vote at this point?
I think you should, if you have any preliminary thoughts or inclination, of course, but it's entirely up to you. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm just torn right now.
Well, we certainly can come back around. No worries.
I will say, I was reluctantly swayed by my former colleague. Where is he?
Tom.
Former
Mr.
commissioner.
Previously.
I had read his letter, and I had my own preconceived notions about data centers, but you did have a convincing argument. So I'll say that much for now.
Okay. Commissioner Jolin?
Yes, thank you. I know in Baltimore right now, there's a little bit of community uproar about data centers. So my first thought in reading this legislation was the response to that, which is obviously what the council should be doing according to how people are feeling in their own districts. We do have a tendency, we as a whole, Baltimore City, our own individuals, to do impact studies to either actually find out information about what we're doing or to kick the can down the road. And so what I am wondering here specifically, are we wanting to do a moratorium specifically to get more information, i.e. yes and, or is this to kick the can down the road longer and longer until we miss the boat, hypothetically? So where I'm sitting is I know and understand and agree with the vice chairman on the argument with BG&E and the argument saying that we cannot afford our electricity bills. I live in Baltimore City. I completely understand that. But the juxtaposition of saying we also can't afford to not have data centers in Baltimore City as well for the future of the next generation. So that's where I'm sitting, which is right in the line.
Mr. Vice Chair?
I'll just briefly echo that I did agree with Commissioner McCoach's suggestion of, we often say in here that zoning is a blunt tool and often the wrong one. To your point, Mr. Chair, if the choice is between a moratorium that could inadvertently turn away business versus doing nothing and watching data centers sprout up in front of our eyes, I think the risk on the latter is really the lesser of those two risks, as has been because of the process it takes to execute something like that. Just lastly, it does, we are all trying to get to the same goal here, which is an appropriate regulation. I think that we should just expedite that process instead of asking the world to slow down.
Yeah, I came into this thinking I was all for this, and I think I still am. I have, in terms of the fact that I think we do need to have a study. I think it's super important before we just allow data centers to come in. We cannot do that. We've just seen it, everyone's been reading about what's happening in other places. And I think that study is super, super, super important. I obviously have a lot of issues over the amount of water usage that we're seeing. And so I'm very sort of interested in not only obviously the electricity, but I really want to know what's going on with water usage, because it's been very difficult in my preliminary research to get straight answers about water usage. And so if we're coming down to, disapprove and allow data centers without a study, that's not, I don't want to fall down there. I mean, I don't want to fall on that side of the argument. So I'm definitely for a moratorium to have a study to learn more about this. But I do think the question of, as you pointed out, the real question here is, do we not allow any sort of review processes to take place during that time? And I'm just not sure where I come down on that yet. But I don't want to risk, I don't want that question to stop me from saying we need a halt on data centers for now, until we study.
Mr. McCoach?
Sure. I have some experience with data centers. Sure. So I agree with the other commissioners. I'm hearing consensus that we need to study this because we need to understand what we're managing. And we can't manage it until we know, the real impacts. And at the same time, I understand Commissioner Jolin's comment about missing the boat. The markets move quickly. Things that we approve here in the commission have a habit of actually the window's passing. So that's a real issue. For me, it's a question of how do you manage it? And the prohibition, if we want to call it that moratorium, will sort of manage the issue of, there will be data centers, okay? So after a year or some period of time, data center development under certain frameworks will continue. So the question is, for this period of time, are we causing harm to businesses, institutions, hospitals by not allowing them to proceed in any way? We could manage this through the form of moratorium and prohibiting certain land uses on the front end, which would basically drive investment, capital development away for the period of the moratorium. Or we can manage it on the back end with the building permit idea. And why you might want to consider that is because the data center development is all about lead times. The switch gear, the generators, the batteries, all of this stuff has months-long lead times. To build a data center, you're getting in line to get this stuff, which takes months to arrive. It has to be built custom for the installation. Similarly, I think that just getting approvals with the utility company is also, a months and months long process. It would be a shame to put the initiation of those activities at the end of a moratorium, because that means that any data center that is proposed, in fact, isn't going to hit the ground and be turned on. I don't know, Amazon likes maybe a year, so you're 2 years plus out before you have any technological support within the city for, whatever users are. So I want the study. I want to manage the period of time, though, during this prohibition that would allow developers or users to have confidence that they can proceed with some of this early, long lead sort of considerations. That's basically just not turn off the flow of development. So those are my thoughts.
Mayor's office, Ms. Lewis.
Yes, thank you. The mayor's office certainly joins in what appears to be a consensus of using this period of the moratorium for study, and is very aligned with the intention of this legislation, particularly protecting ratepayers in an affordability crisis and making sure that we have fair cost allocation. I'll say, we don't want to send a negative signal out there to investment when we're positioning Baltimore as a place that welcomes investment. It does seem that regionally other jurisdictions have not feared that these pauses or periods of reflection are going to set them too far back. So it certainly seems reasonable. And it also seems reasonable to take this period and study it. And I think that BDC should be involved in that study period along with the other agencies mentioned. But it does seem reasonable to take that period and study it without sort of inviting in maybe parties who are interested in a particular project or outcome in Baltimore City itself. So in general, the mayor's office joins in the consensus and the opinions that are laid out in the BDC memo, which is very good. And thank you for the excellent presentation again.
Thank you. Councilman Bullock.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, folks. I think we're pretty much in alignment here. I do appreciate the conversation that's been going on thus far today. I'm still in support of the staff recommendation. I do think it's appropriate to spend that year to study the potential impact. At the same time, I do some of the concerns around the potential investment in the city. And so I think in this time frame, we could also be looking at how that could transpire going on down the road. But again, I'm more so in support of the recommendation by staff and obviously with alignment with the council as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay, so I'll sort of make my comments in the form of just leading up to a potential motion. And I'm not trying to force a vote on this motion. If people want to unpack it, we can unpack it. I'm just trying to be efficient, so let's just talk about it frankly. So what I would propose we do, and I'll talk generally first, is I propose that we accept the staff's recommendation, and I think it's well-written regarding the study. We can look at it in the staff report. I think that's completely non-controversial. Everybody agrees, and I'm not sure what if the specific language really matters all that much. The staff's recommendation does, but for the record, for those who are here, approval with recommendation. Oh, I'm sorry, you have it. Terrific. So there it is on the screen. I'll come back to the second paragraph in a moment. I also think, well, I can cover it now. I would exclude, my motion would exclude the second recommendation. It's awkward, I know, but I think that if in the what seems like a very unlikely event that we do not come up with something at the end of the year, we should go back to exactly where we were at the beginning, beforehand. Not with the definition of data centers that may or may not be right, that may or may not be 10 megawatts, whatever it may be. And I think, frankly, it is and I don't, people should take this in the spirit it's intended. It's a way of putting some pressure on the ecosystem, on this process, to make sure that we do this in the next year. And I think the right way to do it when you do a moratorium like this is to say, we're gonna have this, and at the end of the year, you have to start again. you don't get to extend it, because I think that to me makes more sense. So for me, I would not include the staff's second recommendation. The third thing is, I would suggest, and I think this is maybe just a slight attempt at marketing and compromise with respect to where does Baltimore sit on the chart of jurisdictions that someone will make about what jurisdictions are doing. That when someone does the chart that Austin did for us, I think there's something to be said for saying, if you want to continue a process during this period, you go right ahead. But you're not getting a building permit for this thing. And as I said earlier in my comments, I think you have to say that explicitly. I don't think you can. I think you have to be clear, or you end up in this ambiguity about my suggestion about other uses, and whether the process would reasonably be able to say, or an opponent or someone might be able to say, it's a prohibited, the use during this period, it's prohibited, moratorium and no more moratorium. You can't accept an application. You can't have whatever it might be, site plan review or something else. It will take some city resources, but that's the trade-off I think I'd be willing to make in order to, frankly, put Baltimore in a slightly different part of the chart, right? The chart that says moratorium, total freeze versus, well, you can go and talk to them and they'll talk to you, but remember, at the end of the day, you're not getting a building permit until this is resolved. So I would include that piece. And then, I've been wrestling, as people have heard, with 10 megawatts versus 25 megawatts, and I haven't got a clue which is the right answer. And I understand that there might be some risk of 10 being the wrong number. I just think to some extent I'd be inclined to just let it be. If the council wants to discuss it further, I'm sure you'll get testimony about it. Maybe between now and then, there'll be testimony that convinces you that the number should be higher because of concerns about what's out there. I just don't know how to make a fully informed choice about that. And frankly, I'm just prepared to support the 10 megawatts that are listed in the bill, with the reminder to everybody that we are not making this law. We're just trying to give you our best thinking and judgment and hear what people have to say. So to reiterate, my motion, first paragraph, the study as written, not the second one, which I think, I'm not sure, I haven't read the bill this closely to know, but the intent would be, and I think we could just say this in our motion, someone could work out the details later, that at the end of the year, essentially, there's a full abrogation of the bill, as if it just was not passed, which would return us to where we were. And then third, to say that and the details again have to be worked out, that applicants, we would continue to review, and I would be very clear that those applications are at the applicant's full expense and at their own risk, whatever that means. And again, those things have to be refined a bit. We're not going to refine them sitting here at the Planning Commission. So those are the elements of what I would propose, and I'll make that motion. If there's a second, we can discuss it further, and I'm trying to just find a way to get through the discussion. Is there a second? Hopefully.
I'll second that.
Okay, so it's moved and seconded for purposes of discussion. And I think we're just going to go down the row again, and if there's strong objection to some element of that, I'll amend the motion if necessary, but I just want to get something on the floor, and that's what I would propose we do. Commissioner Allen? Okay. Commissioner Jolin?
I'm still struggling with putting a hold on it, so that's where I'm sitting right now.
Okay. Commissioner Stevenson?
Is this vote or discussion?
No, this is discussion.
I'm, again, certainly in favor of the study. It's not clear to me that we need the moratorium in order to do the study.
Okay. Commissioner Griffin?
I'm good with the motion.
Okay. Mr. McCoach?
I'm okay with where this is going.
Mayor's office?
The mayor's office as well.
Okay. And Councilman Bullock?
Yes, still fine with the motion.
Okay. So what I've heard is that if we had a vote, we'd have enough votes to pass the motion. I don't want people to feel unheard. if the two of you want to talk about it some more, I'm happy to do that, or you could just choose to vote in opposition, and that's obviously your prerogative.
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, so the motion, I've made the motion, it's been seconded. There's no further discussion. Hearing no further discussion, we'll take a voice vote on the motion that I've offered. Mr. Tiso, would you call it, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Robin Allen,
Approve.
John Bullock,
Approve.
Christine Griffin,
Approve.
Claudia Jolin,
Disapprove.
Doug McCoach,
Approve.
Mayor's Office,
Approve.
Eric Stevenson,
Opposed.
and Mr. Laria.
Approved. Thank you very much for an excellent discussion. I really appreciate everybody's participation and everybody in the audience for participating. We're going to move on, but I have a question. Is anybody here to testify on item 7, which is the forest and tree conservation item? Okay, because what I think I'd like to do, because I know there are people who want to testify on item 8 and it's well past 1:30, I think I'd like to swap them with no disrespect to the staff, so that we can get to that item, so that people who are here can go on with other things, and then we will come back to item 7, which there appears to be no public testimony expected, and it'll be more efficient. Okay, is that all right with everybody?
Yes.
So, okay, so Madam Executive Secretary, will you please call item 8 for us in that order, please?
Item number 8, City Council Bill number 25-0088, taxes, property tax, vacant lots, and vacant structures. This is citywide, and Danielle Bilot will present.
All right, good afternoon, honorable council members. Thank you very much for your time today. My name is Danielle Bilot. I'm the landscape planner and greening coordinator for the Department of Planning, and I do everything landscape related, or I am part of everything landscape related here in the department. So that is why I will be reporting on Council Bill 25-0088, the property tax on vacant lots and vacant structures. So as a quick note, for anyone listening online as well, there were a few last minute changes. So I'm gonna go through this and do my best to be clear and succinct. It just might not be as pretty as I would have liked the presentation to be, but it should contain all the information that you need. And I also provide some pre-summaries and post-summaries. So at some points I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna tell you before I tell you to help guide the conversation along. So the current request is for the purpose of amending the already adopted special real property tax rate for vacant and abandoned properties to include vacant lots, repealing certain sections of Ordinance 24-431 that ordained an abrogation date for the ordinance as well. So I'm going to start off with just the actual text as part of the proposed legislation. Normally, it's just, in brackets means removed and all caps is new language, but to help this out a little bit, and looks like it accidentally moved, but the green box outline should help with the proposed additions to the existing legislation, and the red box outline are the proposed repeals with amendments to them. A little bit of the history of this legislation to understand why this is relevant. It'll also come later. So this Maryland State Legislative Session approved HB 2 back in 2024, which allowed the city to assign a special property tax rate to vacant and abandoned properties and structures. And then back in 2024, near the end of the year, Ordinance 24-431 was adopted. It is set to be enacted on just the vacant structures as of this year on July 1st, 2026. So that is why we're hearing this today. There's an amendment proposed to it, but part of this has already been adopted. The vacant structures portion has been adopted. The vacant lot portion is the addition to it. I guess I'll just read the summary real quick. City Council Bill number 25-0088 would apply the same rate structure to vacant lots as currently applied to vacant structures. It sets a definition for vacant lots. It sunsets also the onboarding year of the 3 times tax rate proposed and jumps right to the 4 times tax rate. And also repeals the conclusion year in 2029 to allow this tax in perpetuity. General summary of the proposed amendments, again, addition of vacant lot to the special tax rate in addition to vacant structures, which is already adopted. Repeals the 3 times tax rate and goes straight to the 4 times tax rate for all of the years enacted thereafter. Also repeals the sunset, original sunset date for the special tax rate and allows it to go in perpetuity. And there was a recent amendment proposed, which is one of the main reasons that we're here today, is to amend the enactment date of this tax on vacant structures and potentially vacant lots from July 1st, 2026 to July 1st, 2027. And along the way, hopefully this will become evident why. I have no idea why this has changed. This was fine on the original thing. I'm kind of gonna skip through these. This is just to prove like what's being repealed and being added into here. So vacant lots are being added into here. This is the important part. So the addition of vacant lots as part of this legislation, vacant lot is being defined as an unimproved parcel of real property or an unimproved portion of a block. And all this means is that it's unimproved with an address or unimproved without an address and only a block lot number. That's what this means. So it's just applying to anything that is marked as unimproved property in our databases. The summary of the proposed responses, and I also do apologize, this is not, I think he uploaded the wrong one. Yeah, there's potentially, let me check this with TISO. What we are going to recommend is the addition of vacant lots to the special tax rate to disapprove that amendment. Repeals, thank you very much, Caitlin, because it definitely was correct in the original one. So this is where we're at right now. The summary of proposed responses, I wanted to give these to you all before going through the data, just so you can kind of contextualize where this is coming from. So there are 4 different amendments to this bill being proposed. And this is our stance on each one of them. So the addition of vacant lots to the special tax rate in addition to vacant structures, we are recommending disapproval at this time. The repealing of the 3 times tax rate during the first onboarding year and going straight to the 4 times, we are deferring to DHCD on that one. Repealing the original sunset date for the tax and proposing to allow it in perpetuity, we're also deferring that to DHCD's testimony. And as far as the amendment to the enactment date from July 1st, 2026 to July 1st, 2027, we approve. We would like to support this amendment. So I'm going to start with the vacant structures. Also may use VBN interchangeably with this, which means vacant building notice. That is a little bit more cognizant to people's minds, but I'll try to use vacant structures throughout. And then I'll dive into the vacant lot portion after this. So a little bit of context. The original council bill and ordinance that has been adopted includes only vacant structures for the special tax rate. And a vacant structure is roughly boils down to a structure that has been issued a VBN, but further notes and definitions are in the Baltimore City Code as referenced in here. Vacant structures and vacant lots are actually taxed at the same rate, which is $2.25 per $100 of assessed value. And the goal of this legislation, as I understand it, is to change behavior over tax revenue. So to spur development, building rehabs, or demolition if structure is too unsafe. Little bit of data for perspective on VBNs here, and then I also have maps to follow it up so we can have some graphics as reference. The table that I'm showing there is showing citywide, non-exempt, and exempt VBN data by zoning classification. In general, the vast majority of our vacant structures are residentially zoned. Well, we also do have some industrial and commercial entities that are also have some VBNs attached to them as well. So you can see the associated vacancy rates that average out to a 5.5 citywide vacancy rate at this time. The city of Baltimore owns about 980 vacant structures at this time, about 8.3% of the overall total, of mostly the residential ones, if not all. And for context of applying this tax, so when we look at what would this do to move any type of properties into potential judicial in rem proceedings. About 30 structures would be tipped into in rem eligibility in year 1, about 64 structures in year 2, and by year 5, just over 200 structures, we estimate that at. And then if we're looking at the data via more spatial analysis, the highest VBN percentage by neighborhood or NSA is 39% in the city. And the number of neighborhoods or NSAs with 10% or more VBNs are 40 out of 278. The council districts with the most affected neighborhoods via the 10 plus percentage are in District 9, District 7, 12, and 6 respectively, with those associated numbers after them, highlighting how many neighborhoods in those districts are affected with 10% or more VBNs in their districts or in those neighborhoods. And the planning districts most affected are substantially in the west side of the city, the northwest, west, and southwest.
Very quick question for you
Yes,
on the
sir.
prior slide. The numbers in the bottom left, are those cumulative, or that's 30 plus 64 plus 2, plus whatever, plus 202?
I believe it's addition. This was a statistic from DHCD, so I am not positive. I don't want to necessarily say either way. I am assuming right now that it is not necessarily, it's 30 structures and then an additional 34 structures after that, yes.
And then we don't have the numbers. This is not necessarily material to the decision. I just want to get the number right. So that would imply 30 plus 64 plus something in year 3 plus something in year 4 plus 202 in year 5, not a cumulative number, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's why I was like, just
Right?
double checking, yes.
Thank you.
And then the map shows just more of a spatial location of where the most affected council districts and planning districts are located with 10% or more VBNs per NSAs in there, which is just referencing the previous slide. So as you can see, the most affected ones are districts 9, 7, 6, and 12 for the council districts, and then the southwest, west, and northwest planning districts in the city, substantially on the west side. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time today. So when we think about applicable circumstances for this tax, this is where it becomes really important, especially regarding the state legislative abilities that have been granted to us. So the intended applicable circumstances for a vacant structure tax would likely include vacant structures that are currently not under permit, right? They're just sitting there vacant and potentially unsafe. I also have the second item with an asterisk because I have the exact same item in both categories. And the reason for that is the range of permits that we see go through for different vacant structures throughout our systems, right? So some of them are full rehab, some of them are just for, like, say, drywall permits, right? So those range for intended circumstances versus unintended. Some are just meant to be under permit for different regulations to adhere to. And then the vacant structures that are actively on the market with unabated VBNs with no UNO. So those are the circumstances that we intend to position this tax for, right? But due to the blanket nature of it currently, there are more circumstances that may be unintended when this is applied, which is going to relate to the need to go back to the state, which will become clear in a little bit. So again, the vacant structures under permit, range in applicability, the ones that are just under, keep putting forth permits to be under permit. VBN properties in process of demolition, right? You're not going to abate a VBN if you're just going to demo the building. Developers in holding for additional properties from the city. Don't just want to develop one property at a time, probably want to do a chunk. Homeowners, when the developer did not abate the VBN prior to selling, which is actually relatively common situations. Deceased individual's property, when the property is still in their name, such as tangled titles. And while a vacant structure is in the receivership process and going through the courts. Additionally, this would apply currently to recipients of the city-state subsidies or other time-bound subsidies, such as TIF and BBRI funds, and also owners who are experiencing hardship. So those generally are the range of situations, which is the reason for the postponement of the enactment date. The goal of this is to go back to the state legislators to ask for not just subclasses, which is the only thing we are currently allowed to set a special tax rate for. It could either be a blanket one or we could create subclasses. But the problem with creating subclasses is the subclasses almost always would engulf some of the unintended consequences with this. What we would like to do is go back to the state and ask for the ability to create exemptions. That would make this a lot easier to apply to the correct circumstances and not allow residents and good faith developers to be swept up in the increased tax rate when they are doing the good work with for our city. So then we get to the vacant lot portion of this. So this is the proposed addition as part of this. Currently, this would also have the blanket 4 times tax rate applied to it in addition to the vacant structures portion. Currently, vacant lots are defined as unimproved parcels, and there's a few notes with this. There's technically no codified definition for unimproved, and so when our databases read anything as unimproved, they are using $0 in SStat improvements to categorize a property as vacant. And I'm going to tell you about all the circumstances that currently count as vacant underneath this definition. So SStat improvements, in order to get any dollar sign as attached to that, I haven't seen anything less than $100 when I've gone through a bunch of different valuations, so I use that as kind of like the baseline. They require a physical, permanent structure to be built to have a valuation. So like a permanent sign could result in receiving a $100 SStat valuation. For context, a Greenmount Cemetery, huge one, lots of structures, $100 in SStat valuation. So there's a very wide range of what can have a $100 valuation versus $0 valuation. And currently the city's databases do not discriminate between legal uses with $0 in SStat improvements, nuisance vacant lots, those with active or inactive registrations, or vacant lots that are maintained or for community benefit. There are many valid uses for properties that still result in it being categorized as a vacant lot. And I'll go through those as well after I present the same data in perspective for vacant lots. So this table is slightly different. It has the same zoning classes outlined here, but this highlights in one category the non-exempt vacant lots that would have this tax applied to it, and then also the exempt vacant lots just for context for like how many vacant lots are we really dealing with in the city overall. So our total number of vacant lots in the city is just over 21,000. So you'll notice that's just a slight discrepancy for the total because there are other ones like underneath like educational zoning and hospitals and a few things that aren't necessarily swept up in the commercial, industrial, and residential categories. But the vast majority are in residential, and then we still do have a good chunk in the commercial and industrial sectors as well. About 4.43% of all parcels in the city, are unimproved and privately owned. And about 4.4%, so very similar, are unimproved city-owned parcels. On the right-hand side, the highest percent of vacant lots by neighborhood is 67%. There actually are neighborhoods with over 60% vacant lots in them currently. And the number of neighborhoods with 20% or more vacant lots are 55 out of 278, which is quite a few.
Could you just identify like 1 or 2 or 3 that have 67 or something approaching that percent? Do you happen to know?
I have them on my computer and I can get them to you right after I give the presentation, if that's okay. Yeah, I do. I have them all individually listed out, so I could also send them to you. The council districts that are most affected with this are District 12 with the most, D11, D10, D9, and D7. And the planning districts most affected are the South Planning District, Northeast, West, North, and East. So it's almost a little bit opposite of where the VBNs are in the city versus vacant lots. So the maps are slightly different than what is shown in the city planning districts just due to the density of where those neighborhoods are located within the planning districts with the highest or with 20% or more vacant lots in them. But this is again just for a more spatial analysis. But as we can see, the west side of the city for both categories is affected. So I just got a couple of pictures before I show you the lists of what is considered a vacant lot. So both of these are considered a vacant lot. So we have a full-on urban farm, and we have a private drive that people can access. Those are both considered vacant lots in our system, and both legal uses. We also have the side yard program that DHCD runs. All of those are categorized as vacant lots. We also have legally unbuildable parcels in the city. Those are categorized as vacant lots. And a large portion on the entire west side of our city has very high forest canopy coverage that are also technically vacant lots right now. So there is a concern that this increased tax could increase our canopy loss pretty rapidly as well. So the different categories that would currently be affected by the following vacant land addition to this tax would include land zoned as open space that you can't build stuff on really anyway. Community managed open spaces, land trust properties. While they have a 0% tax rate, they still pay their tax and then request reimbursement. So they would have to have 4 times more cash on hand to be ready. Urban farms, agriculture and gardens, forested properties, which there are a lot of on the west side of the city that are not in pre-development, private drives and easements, the side yards that through the DHCD program, vacant lots in pre-development, legally unbuildable parcels, different rights of way, public easements on private property, subsurface improvements without above grade improvements such as underground parking. Those are currently marked as vacant lots. Stormwater management facilities, and with any potential updates to the MS4 requirements for the city, we don't know necessarily what they're going to look like, but if they result in increased stormwater management capacities that are going to need to be used for that, those would also be categorized as vacant lots. And required landscaping under HOAs also included. Private garages in the city, as we know, like in the inner block lots with those small garages, some of those would be captured with this tax and some of them wouldn't. I can't figure out a rhyme or reason to it. I just know that that's what it is. So there are chunks of them that would get the increased tax rate and chunks of them that would not. The median property taxes on vacant lots with this tax would increase from about $47 to $189. But I wanted to outline just a couple situations to highlight the specific unintended effects of this tax that are higher than the average. So say like urban farms, there's also more in the staff report on this, but urban farms, one example that I pulled, their taxes were just under $800 this year, so then all of a sudden they're increased to over $3,000. Forested properties, just under $3,000, and now we're hitting 5 digits with those. And community managed open spaces, the example that I pulled is currently $250. They allow different community groups to go and enjoy their space, including library groups and everything as well. And all of a sudden, then they'll be hit with a $1,000 tax rate as well. So I'm going to summarize both of these. A little bit about the impact and equity analysis summary for vacant structures. The proposed special tax rate could potentially have a positive impact on the redevelopment of nuisance and abandoned structures. And then the middle is just reiterating which neighborhoods and districts have 10+% of VBNs in them. This tax could exacerbate economic strain and overburden and underinvested neighborhoods in the western half of Baltimore. It is important that the city work with the state on either a blanket ability to create exemptions to ensure that all unintended applications are clearly outlined to the state to be included with a proposed amendment for the 2027 legislative session. Currently, we don't know what the state would allow us to do, if they would give us the ability to do blanket exceptions and then we could figure them out ourselves, or if we would need to pre-submit them as well, which would be really rapid, right? Like we would need to do those in the next couple months. For vacant lots, the proposed special tax rate could potentially have a positive impact on redevelopment of nuisance and abandoned lots, but also a very strong negative impact on many alternative positive uses of vacant land. And that's what we're really concerned with. Our data currently, we don't have any easy way to figure out when we look at vacant land, which one is for which purpose. That would be a very, very large undertaking, and to enact that in a year would be potentially really detrimental. There could be a positive result regarding an increase in tax revenue for the city, while also encouraging some landowners to develop truly vacant land that could result in fewer unmaintained lots. But there also is a very strong concern around potential quote-unquote rapid forest canopy loss with this tax as well, and the resulting impacts on air quality, urban heat, and stormwater management, especially on the west side of the city. So the current state enabling legislation allows us to create subclasses, but currently does not have the ability to create exemptions. Subclasses create additional hurdles, as I outlined. If a subclass of VBNs is to receive the increased tax, such as those, say we want to put those not currently under permit, right? Like that would be a subclass because that's the intended application of this. We could see a whole influx then of people putting forth a lot of permits for things that could vary in range, right? It could be for paint, it could be for new roofs, right? So concerns for that. Exemptions are really important to get, and that's why the proposed year postponement of this is so important so that we can work with the state to allow us to have exemptions on this. And that's basically what this one says. Operational analysis, significant resources may be required to update and manage the city databases as well as agencies administering the notification. An appeals process, should it be amended, would likely be very cumbersome to administer and potentially unfairly puts the undue burden on residents and good faith developers as well. So just something to make note. Request of the state regarding an amendment to the enabling legislation to allow for exemptions is very important. And also really important that DHCD, DOP, and other city agencies continue to work together on the exemption list to ensure consistency and that unintended applications and negative impacts are not a result of the tax. There also is, for the vacant lot approach, because I always try to have like, here's another option, right? We are proposing to not include vacant lots at this time, but there are alternatives to still approach a quote-unquote penalty on truly abandoned vacant lots as well. If we deem this relevant, would need to work with DHCD more on this. We could do one of two things, just off the top of my head. We could define unimproved in the Baltimore City Code so that the unintended vacant lots don't get swept up in this. That could result in a new UNO process for lots that are in good standing and for good uses. And we also could address vacant lots without an active registration. We actually do have a mechanism to do this in our city code. So part of this could be to send out mailers to those that currently don't have active registrations. As far as I'm aware, it costs $25 a year to keep your registration active for a vacant land parcel. And so then we could find out which lots are truly abandoned and work with the system on that. And that system could actually severely expedite the process of acquisition for those plots of land as well. So a summary of the recommendations again is to approve the amendment submitted by Councilwoman Ramos regarding the enactment date change to postpone to 2027 instead of July 1st, 2026 of this year. Disapproval on the amendment that adds vacant lots to the legislation currently, and to defer to DHCD on repealing the sunsetting date of the tax and repealing the onboarding year of the 3 times tax rate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any immediate questions for staff before we turn to testimony, which will start, of course, with the sponsor who is here? Questions to start with? Okay, well, we may have others. Councilwoman Ramos, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Odette Ramos, I'm the councilwoman from the 14th District, sponsor of this bill. With me is the Director of Finance and also DHCD, who will come up after me. I have a lot to talk about here. One is, first of all, I want to be clear that this bill, 250088, is a follow-up from what we did last term. Last term, we created the vacant property tax on structures, did the sunset, and started at three times and then 4 times. What my bill does is it, as the staff said, it eliminates the 3 times, it goes automatically for 4 times. It removes the sunset, and it adds vacant lots. So I will say that under this recommendation of just approving an amendment, I don't have an amendment to add vacant lots. It's already in the bill, okay? Vacant lots are in the bill. And so in part of the analysis, I just want to just go through why we needed to do this. One is that finance has obstacles in terms of doing three times and then 4 times. So it was just a practical matter of let's just pick one. Removing the sunset makes sense because we're going to be working on addressing our vacant properties for a really long time. So why end it now? And we always, as the council, can always put in another bill and put in an enactment date. So that seemed to make sense to remove that as well. Adding vacant lots is extremely important. And so I'll go through why I think the vacancy tax is important in the context of our work and include vacant lots. So there's a couple of reasons for taxes, right? There's raising revenue, and then there's behavior change. And in this case, it is not revenue raising. We don't plan on raising a bunch of revenue on this. What the vacancy tax does for structures and lots is it would do 2 things. One is to get attention to those who are not doing a good job of maintaining their properties, to say, look, you've got to do something, otherwise you're going to be paying this larger tax, okay? And so it would hopefully spur people doing the right thing. I have several examples in my district along Green Mountain Avenue on the 31, 32, and 3300 block. So that I finally got VBNs on, and so now we can put the tax on them. The other piece is to get more properties eligible for in-rem. Right now, in-rem is only what I call in-rem 1, which is when the liens exceed the assessed value of a property, the city can foreclose. And we are doing a great job. And I just have to back up and say one thing, that this bill, it doesn't have anything to do with zoning. Doesn't have anything to do with zoning, it's policy. And so this is new for, I think, all of us to even have this conversation here in this building. So just to review, in-rem we've been working very diligently with the courts and also with DHCD to get the capacity that they need. These in-rem cases go before a magistrate, and it's a single docket. So the in-rem has been, and I'm proud to say one of the people who helped to bring it here to Baltimore, our primary acquisition strategy. And from court filing to acquisition, it's about a 6-month process, which is lightning speed to what we used to have. And so we're really doing a great job. We have acquired already 800 in the last 3 years that we've been doing this in a diligent way, and know that we need to do more. So I can talk about that capacity stuff in a minute, but as you saw on the slides, not every property that is vacant is eligible for in-rem. Because the liens have to exceed the assessed value. And so because the value of the property is so in some cases, like in the first district, the value of the property is actually pretty high when it's a vacant property. And so you can't get the liens up because it's not escalating as high. Certainly, we're working on with DHCD to do more violations, right? Those $1,000 violations for not rehabbing your property. So that brings the liens up. And also we escalated the penalties from, if it's $1,000 and there's a roof problem, it's another $1,000. If it's didn't abate the VBN and you've got high grass and weeds, it's another $1,000. So we escalated that. So we're trying to do all of these things to escalate into in-rem. Now, I also have a bill to create in-rem 2, which is when the liens are below the value of the property. That's not what we're talking about today. Although that hearing is next week, is in a couple weeks. So the idea here is to try to make sure that not only are we providing this kind of push to get something done, but we're also trying to get more properties into in-rem. Now, we understand that there are some people that there will be unintended consequences here. And when this bill passed the General Assembly, by the way, it took 4 years to pass the General Assembly to give us this permission. As you know, the General Assembly, if we want to add a tax or even a tax credit, we still need to get permission from the General Assembly. So we had to go to the General Assembly. It took 4 years to get this passed. None of us who are working on this thought that just by having language, just regular language that we could do this, that we could not do exceptions. The law department said to us 2 years ago, right after this passed, and I got everybody together and said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. And then, we started talking about exceptions, and the law department was like, sorry, tax code doesn't say you can do exceptions, so you can't do it, even if it is silent. And so from then, the last couple of years, we've been thinking about, I did go back to the sponsors and ask them if they wanted to, if we could put some language in for the next season, the next session. That was not their desire at the time. And so we've been working diligently on ideas for figuring out how to address some of these unintended consequences. The first, there's three major people that I worry about relative to the vacancy tax. One is, and this was explained with the staff, one is that there are people who inadvertently bought properties that they thought that they were fully rehabbed, and yet they still have vacant building notices on them because they did not use permits. And that's about 400 people that we know of. I think it's a little more. And so what we've been doing since we finally were able to identify them is to work through the process so that they could get the use in occupancy. And that's not easy because they figured that they had already bought a rehabbed house, and yet they have to get all the inspections. Sometimes they have to it's really bad. And we're working with the consumer protection folks and others to figure out if we can see patterns as to who actually did this. I think there are. I think they know who they are. But it's also still happening because I don't want to editorialize about the permit system, but it still lacks, it's not perfect. And so there's still a lot of people that are actually doing work without permits, okay? The second is, our community development partners that are doing the good work. So initially, we thought that one exception could be that if you have a permit, and as long as you're doing the diligent work of actually doing the work, then you would be exempt from the tax as well. And then there's others that are bundling properties, right, to be able to do a larger development. And so those are sort of the three that I have been, kind of worried about. And we've been trying to figure out workarounds, right, in the absence, right? So one is to, work with those residents, those 400 residents. The other is maybe we would do a rebate program, right, where you rehab the house and then we would pay you back for that amount of the tax that you had to. And a lot of the single family rehabbers were like, we don't like it, but we're okay. But some of the larger developers were like, ooh, this is really bad. We cannot have those carrying costs, right? So we finally came to the conclusion that we actually have to go back to the state, and that we actually have to get that language in there for exceptions, and that it would be broad, okay? That it would be broad language that says that we could make exceptions. But in the meantime, what we are doing is also, and I'll talk about the vacant lots in 1 second, we've committed, my office, finance and DHCD is committed to meeting structured meetings every month, every other week, to really figure out what this is so that we can present the General Assembly with our plan. But more importantly, that we actually know what we're doing moving forward. Okay. The second thing about the vacant lots. Now, adding the vacant lots is very, very, very important for the city council. I will tell you that every single member has said something about it to me. And almost every single member. And so part of it is, again, we have some nuisance vacant lots that nobody's doing anything with, and we need to either change behavior or get them up to NREM, okay? We know that there are community gardens that are privately owned. Because the publicly owned aren't going to get taxed. So one of the things that some of the stats you saw didn't differentiate between public and privately owned. So the publicly owned don't get taxed. The privately owned would get the tax, but the same type of exceptions would apply, where if they're being bundled for redevelopment, that would be one thing. But DHCD is continuing to work on an inventory to really figure out who the users are, what they're being used for. So our thought was that we would create a use permit, right, for the lots that are being used in a productive way, so that then they wouldn't get the tax, right? So we are thinking about all of these things. But know that we need more time, which is why there's the amendment to move it 1 year. and also to continue the conversations. And I do believe that the vacancy tax is part of the strategy around our vacancy reduction, because we need all of the tools. And I've said that from the beginning of all of this. We need all of the tools, and that this is one of the tools that will help move us forward. Now, some of my colleagues and others in the public would say, let's start with a 10 times the rate, right? Well, we felt very strongly that we need to start with 4 and see how it goes. And again, we can always put in another piece of legislation if we needed to change it. But it needs to be not a step-up approach, but a one, and then go from there. So I've outlined our strategy as to what we want to do. I will say that I think that it's been a productive discussion to have, sort of think about what the Planning Commission would want. My normal process is to bring everybody together. I did not bring staff in because, Planning Commission staff, so she did not hear all this conversation around what our plans are, which is why she outlined things the way that she did. So in future, if this is going to be the next practice of the Planning Commission, where all of my vacant lot and vacant property bills are going to come before the Planning Commission, I would bring staff in to have some of these conversations, because I think that's important. And again, it is my process as we, have all of the agencies that are assigned to these bills. So that's why you're seeing some of these inconsistencies. But I think, again, this is very important, and I hope to get your support for the bill. Keep vacant lots in, because it is part of the process. And then also, and I have one particular colleague that has one particular nuisance vacant lot that he'd really like to tax it like 1,000,000%. And I know that that's gonna, so I want to make sure that we're doing this right as well and not having unintended consequences. But just know that we're trying to be very thoughtful about this, which is why we did try the workarounds. We could not make that work. We have to go back to the General Assembly and get that exemption language, and we will work together to get a plan. And we've, again, committed to be working together at a, very good pace, checking in throughout the year so that we have a plan to present to the General Assembly. But again, what we want is just that broad language from the General Assembly. We will still have to pass a bill at the City Council once it passes to be able to have those exceptions in place. Happy to answer any questions. Hi.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Sure.
I'm not sure that these are questions. It's clear you've been very thoughtful about this, so this might just be some more things to think about.
Great, perfect.
I live in one of those neighborhoods that's high on the list of lots of vacant structures and lots. The community gardens concern me. I heard that, you acknowledge that and have a plan to
Have like a use
hopefully-
permit for that, yep.
So again, thinking about unintended consequences, a couple of things jumped out at me, like with the community managed open space and the community gardens. We've already got a few different mechanisms through DHCD to manage those spaces, the adopt a lot, being one. So if we were going to do some kind of permitting for open spaces, I imagine it would probably work somewhat similar to that. That's not a perfect system any more than our permitting is a perfect system.
I see where you're going on that, yep.
So there could be a lot of, kind of encumbrance there. My other concern is, I look at this two ways. One, the unintended, the people who get sucked in unintendedly, the folks on that unintended consequences list that are the most reachable. All the people a lot of the people who are trying to correct behavior are the folks who are unreachable, the dead and et cetera. So I wonder about that. But I guess my point here is this going to encourage the owners that we can contact to start a community garden to avoid the tax, and then 2 years later, it's just like it was? Or even worse, are people going to start rebuilding garages on all those inner block lots so that they've got a structure, because that's better in the code. Again, just some things as a impacted resident that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I'm very much appreciate that, and I think that's going to be all of the thinking around, what would that look like? And we can make a use permit as easy or as hard as we want to make it, to get, I mean, intentionally, not unintentionally. And so we do have some thinking to do around that, because your thought about, like, somebody is going to have it as a community garden and then later on is going to, I mean, all of the adopt-a-lots, frankly, are, temporary anyway, right? Because they may end up being, if the adopt-a-lots are city-owned, they wouldn't get the tax. And, if it's going to be ending up buying, then the city can take those. When it gets to Baltimore Green Space, however, then that is held in a trust. And Baltimore Green Space is a nonprofit right now. Nonprofits, pure nonprofits, not nonprofits incorporate and in partnership with corporations, but nonprofits aren't paying the tax. So we would, obviously need to think through what a use permit would look like, what the, ramifications are. I don't envision it being like we're going to have a use permit for gardens, we're going to have a use permit for playgrounds, we're going to have a use permit for that. I don't envision that. We have to go through that process. I think it's just one sort of, this is a productive use for the lot, and then go from there. But we have some more thinking to do on that, but we acknowledge that there's that issue. And that's the same, one of the things that we have to watch out for even with a vacant structure, where somebody might, get the tax and go, oh, I'm just going to file an electrical permit, and then not do anything, right, for the year. So it would have to be permit for a full year and active rehab. So there would have to be that caveat put in place as well. Now, for the folks that, are bundling properties to be able to do redevelopment, one thing that we've been talking about is whether or not they get certified by DHCD, as we know that they're doing this development, and so that they wouldn't get the tax. So all of this is still being played out, but it's an acknowledgement that we still have thinking to do, which is, again, why we needed to push it back a year to do this. Now, I will say that everybody who owns a VBN did get a notice that they will be taxed at 3 times, because that was part of the legislation. And therefore, we heard a lot more people coming to us saying, hey, what's going on here? I think that's all good discussion. I think that's really good discussion. So I'm glad that it happened so that we can actually hear more about some of the concerns, but we also get a chance to do it right.
Just one more on INREM, then thank you for that response. On INREM, because you're the expert on that. If the goal of this is to push more properties into INREM so the city can acquire and put them to useful use, per your letter, I think you cited there's, we know there's currently 3,000 something INREM eligible properties.
Yeah.
But not all those properties are currently in the queue.
Correct.
The city has long been standoffish about acquiring vacant properties because of carrying costs, et cetera. So I'm not necessarily seeing the supply and demand where if we push these properties, that if we tax these properties, that we're going to follow through in the same way in all neighborhoods.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So this is where I think the policy decision on how we move forward on our vacant property work, there's some slight differences. I think we need to acquire everything. I think the city should acquire everything so that we can protect it and then make sure that we're working with community on the best outcome, okay? That's not the case now. What we're doing now in INREM, though, is utilizing the block level planning, looking at what are the priorities in each area, particularly in some of the target areas, the impact investment areas and the BVRI areas. But I want to acknowledge that making sure that we're paying attention to Carrollton Ridge is really important, which isn't in either. So I know that Councilman Bullock is listening, and he knows that I've been talking about that too, where we want to figure out what are those strategies and then get them into the queue. Now, the what's happening right now in INREM is that we've been doing it for 3 years, so we're still, I think we've worked out most of the bugs in terms of process. And we made one change in the General Assembly that passed that will help, but it's also about capacity. We want to get more lawyers to get more of those cases in. And then there's a lot of work being done right now on the disposition, so making sure that they get out in the right way. So I do think that because, especially now that we're in this race to make sure that we're getting vacant properties to productive use really quickly, but in a strategic way, we need to acquire as much as possible. We also have in-rem 2 coming. In-rem 2 is where the liens are below the value of the property. There's 2 other a little bit complicated steps till foreclosure on those, but at least we've got this other tool as well, because we're going to need everything. Even sometimes the tax isn't going to get people up to in-rem, so we're going to need to do in-rem 2 as well. So we just need to think about all of that. So yes, the city has been hesitant. They're working on fixed price. They're working on other ways to get properties out the door. There's a lot of planning so that there's partners in each area that are ready for those properties. So I think that we're in the right space where people are asking us, can you get this property in rem so I can have it now? So it's not like we're just sitting on properties. There's the fixed price where it's sort of more scatter site, and then there's looking at the whole block, 1600 block of Gorsuch, you've heard me talk about before, where we have one person doing that entire block. And so sometimes we're holding those properties in order for the rest of the block to be acquired and then pushed out. So I do think that's accelerating, and we're going to see more of that getting pushed out. Mm-hmm.
I just want to, this is a very not technical, but clarifying question. I think it relates to something you said earlier, Councilwoman. This bill is an amendment to existing legislation. And then you have also submitted the first item, an amendment to the bill to change the enactment date, right?
Correct,
Because,
yes.
So it's an amendment to a bill that is itself sort of an amendment. So it's confusing because the second one, and I think you said this earlier, the vacant lots is an amendment to the code. It's not an amendment to the bill, because as you said, the bill started with vacant lots in it. So I just want to be clear. I think it's a little bit confusing there.
Right, there's not a standalone amendment going into this bill. The lots are already in the bill.
Right. I mean, so I think it really, like if this were written with a few extra words, it would say approve amendment to bill submitted by councilwoman, disapprove amendment to code that adds vacant lots.
Well, what if the commission wanted to take out vacant lots, which I do not recommend, then you would say, recommend an amendment to remove the vacant lots.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for the councilwoman? And I think we want to hear from departments. Is that councilwoman okay?
Yes, there was another question.
Was there? I'm sorry. Did someone have a question, Danny?
Not a question, but more so of a comment. Just wanted to thank my colleague, Councilmember Ramos, for all the work she's doing on this. As you saw in the initial presentation, that the 9th District specifically has so many of these vacants, and we've talked about, not wanting some of the good actors caught up with some of the bad actors. But again, just really appreciate, this effort my colleague has put forth, and hope for a favorable disposition from my colleagues on the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, and I do want to let the commission know that Councilman Bullock is very much involved in these conversations around the vacancy tax. So, which I'm glad that he's willing to be a part of it. Mm-hmm.
Did you want me to clarify my clarification? I'd be happy to if it was confusing, and I'm sorry.
Well, thank you for bringing it up, because I had the question when Councilwoman Ramos made the statement that vacant lots are already in the bill. So I'm confused about, because I looked at the staff report and now I'm looking at the bill itself, and it says, for the purpose of amending the special real property tax rate for vacant and abandoned property to include vacant lots.
So I'll tell you what my understanding is, that the author is right there, so she can correct me, but I'll give it a try. There's an existing law that includes vacant structures but not vacant lots. The existing vacant structures law goes into effect in 2026, which is soon. So it started off as we better fix that, because it can't go into effect in 2026 because it needs authority for exceptions, because everybody acknowledges, even if people don't agree on the specific list of exceptions, everybody agrees that some exceptions are needed, whether it's 3 or 7 or 17.
Right.
So The threshold issue and the thing that has to happen is there needs to be an amendment to the code via a bill or ordinance that pushes the effective date out a year. Otherwise, come whatever it is, July 1 of 2026, we're going to have a vacant building structures tax without exceptions. So that's the threshold issue, and we can go back. In addition to that, the councilwoman has added to the bill, which would then add to the law, vacant lots. New subject, right? We're now going to talk about adding vacant lots to the vacant structures framework,
Which is in the bill.
which is in the bill.
What does in the bill mean in this
It's
context?
in 250088.
It's in the pending, the addition of vacant lots, which do not exist in the code today. What exists in the code are vacant structures with this, right? The councilwoman is saying, in addition to the structures, she proposes to add vacant lots as well as vacant structures.
Right.
Right.
Bill itself, not an amendment to.
That's correct.
Yeah, so all I was saying, Eric, is the language is just a little bit loose in that in the first bullet.
I see.
That's
There's
an amendment
not
to.
an amendment that adds vacant lots. The bill adds vacant lots.
That's correct.
Got it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Follow.
Well, it was worth getting that straight, so thank you for doing that. Okay.
Because I got confused.
Is everybody okay?
Yes.
Did I get any corrections from the sponsor?
No, that's
Okay.
fine.
So if there's nobody else with questions for the councilwoman, I'd like to hear, I know there are departments who wish to testify. I see finance, I see DHCD. Are you both testifying? You certainly, either of you, both of you are welcome to do it.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you. My name is Michael Moxton. I am the Director of the Baltimore City Department of Finance. Councilwoman Ramos touched on many of the things I was going to talk about, but broadly speaking, it is really important to do this and really important to do this right. We have as of today, 11,800 and some vacant properties around the city. They are an economic drag on the city. They are a drag on their neighbors. They cost us money. Well, they cost people health and time and everything else imaginable. Having a carrot and stick approach is the best, smartest way from the perspective of the Department of Finance to tackle the vacants problem in the city. And the vacant tax is absolutely a part of that strategy. The idea is to move folks at the margins. Some people might be genuine about fixing their vacant. We want to make sure that they do it, that they don't do it at some point, but that they do it now. We understand that this work is not easy, but the longer a vacant stays vacant, the more it hurts the community, and we want to provide that incentive. Alongside with all of the carrot incentives of the funding that goes into our vacant strategy that is putting tools into people's hands to actually rehab these vacants. Some folks are not serious, and we want to push them off the edge the other way. If they are racking up fines and citations on their building, if they don't see a path forward, we would much rather go through the in-rem process or encourage people to just donate their house to the city if they just don't want the burden on them. Commissioner, to your question about in-rem, there was a lot of time that went into getting it set up, but it's really accelerating now. We were doing about 100 to 200 properties a year a couple of years ago as far as getting them into NREM. Last year, it was over 300. This year, it's going to approach 600. We expect next year for it to get over 800. We've put in resources, lawyers to aid with the process, technical folks, engineers, and we are moving faster than we have before to dispose of these homes as well. There's a pipeline, but we need to feed that pipeline. The goal is to eliminate all 11,800 genuinely within not just our lifetimes, but our professional careers. We are in year 2 of the 15-year program. We are at this point dropping vacants in net by close to 1,000 a year. And so we need to keep feeding the in-rem pipeline in order for this work to succeed. And some folks may just need an extra couple of years while they figure out what to do, and that's okay too. But like I said, a vacant costs everybody something. So we're asking those folks to shoulder some of that cost with this higher tax rate. And it's not meant as a game-changing revenue driver, but it is still revenue for the city. So those are all the reasons that we need to do a vacancy tax. And I was always a very staunch proponent of we need to just launch it as soon as we're ready. And for the last couple of years, we've been trying to figure out if there is a way for us to launch it on July 26th. Truly, if there was a way, we wouldn't be asking for this delay. We've been getting our technical systems ready. The problem is just that fundamentally, you have to have exceptions. You cannot punish the good actors. That would have a chilling effect on the developers around the city, the people who are engaged in the vacancy work. We did a lot of thought around, could we do rebates? And rebates may still well be part of the landscape, and we'll be working with the council on some of those tools in the future. But what we heard from developers is, first of all, the carrying costs are real, especially for developers who are doing a lot of properties. And again, we're talking on the margins, and these decisions have razor-thin margins. We do not want to lose a significant development, a significant block or a neighborhood because somebody just can't afford it right now. A developer can't make the numbers pencil out right now. Something we also hadn't fully digested until we sent out all the letters and started hearing back from all the developers is that even if we did a rebate program that made everybody whole, developers have to go to banks to get financing. And those banks look at what the current tax rate is, and a promise of a future rebate isn't good enough in many circumstances to get the same level of financing that you would have gotten if you were not subject to a higher tax rate. So for all those reasons, we need to move the date to July 1, 2027. We had a lot of discussion about how far back to push it to, and we settled on 1 year as opposed to longer for all the reasons that I started on. It's really important for the city to have a vacancy tax. It's hard to do. It is going to generate a lot of conversation no matter when we do it. We just need to do it. And we can do it with an exemption from the state. And in the meantime, the city can do the work in creating these exemptions, having regular meetings with our colleagues on the council, getting an exemption list everybody feels good about, and then doing all the preliminary work this winter and spring using that exemption list, and ultimately looking to succeed in getting that state legislation this spring that would allow us to make this July 1 rate.
So, Director, thank you. So your focus seems to be on the vacant structures. You already have that law. In fact, you have too much law because the problem with the current law is just that it's overbroad, that we need to deal with some exceptions, and we're all struggling with how to demonstrate those exceptions. And we need authority to do the exceptions, and people are quite reasonably unwilling to implement the law as it currently exists because it wouldn't allow us to have exemptions, and we'd be catching the good vacants with the bad vacants, the unintended consequences. So I'm just puzzled because I feel like you're pitching something that that's the law. The law is there is a 3, then soon enough 4-time vacant structure tax that's effective today as of July 1, 2026 if we do nothing. And you're here saying quite reasonably, and the councilman is saying, look, 26 is a problem because it's going to cause all these unintended consequences. But the debate over whether there should be a vacant structures tax happened in 2024. And there's now an ordinance that says there's a vacant structures surtax or multiple tax. I think it'd be a different, and we'll get to this at some point, should we add vacant lots to it as the councilwoman has proposed? That's an open question and it'll have to get decided. But the vacant structures tax is in the code. The only question is, do we want to defer it for a year, which is an administrative issue? And if you think I'm wrong, please tell me, but I feel like we're talking about something that is basically, it's academic. It's like it exists, whether you like it or not.
I understand what you're saying, but what I'll say is, right now, the law says 2026.
Right.
I'm here to provide context on what I see as threading a needle, and that is, we cannot do it in 2026, but we should not wait any longer than we have to. So that July 2027, I feel, is the right balance, and I'm sort of explaining my thinking for why that's the right balance.
Thank you. Perfect. I've got it.
Absolutely. On the idea of going straight to the 4 times tax rate and removing the sunset, Department of Finance supports that. We think that that is just a simplification of the existing code, and simple is good. It'll be easy to message that this is what the rate is. If we think that we want to go higher in the future or do something different in the future, we can have those discussions. But so we support that provision. And on lots, my same reasoning applies in that all of these things are good to do when we can do them right. So I defer to DHCD on their operational constraints. The reason that lots weren't in the original legislation is because we just didn't have enough data on them. We're gathering that data now. I'll simply speak to intent that lots are something we have to do when we can get the data, when we can get the exemptions right. We just want to make sure that we have that for all the reasons that you heard earlier today of the additional unintended consequences, where with structures, we sort of all have already been doing the work. With lots, we still need to do that work to go through those unintended consequences. So I feel like it's very important overall to have this be balanced, and I feel like the recommendations in front of you are that balance.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for the Director of Finance? Hearing none. Is DHCD also going to, are you going to speak? Oh, well, all right, then I have a question for DHCD. Okay. I just would like whomever to just quickly on the third bullet. I assume the 3x to 4x tax rate was a phase-in sort of concept, like do 3 and then, that's fine if that's the answer. That's fine. And then the other question is, was the sunset repeal some sort of compromise? I wasn't around for the original legislation that basically said, what if it doesn't work? It's the usual reason you might put a sunset in a bill.
I will say that the process that we went through last term under the previous council president, I think that there was a sort of thinking around, well, let's try it and see what happens. And I think that we should just do it, and if we need to change it, we can change it.
Okay, understood. Okay. All right, is anybody else? No, nobody else is testifying. Does anybody else wish to testify? Okay, does the commission have any questions directly for anybody who's testified?
I have one more comment.
Please, yeah.
It's okay.
To add to the list of, unintended consequences could be lots that are not served by utilities. What do you tell me if I own a lot and I want to build something, but I can't for XYZ reasons? We have some situations like that on the west side. And, I'd additionally point out that, especially in our R8 neighborhoods, as we are, taking stock of our housing and of our lots and trying to right-size density for our current utility system, our current school system, our current et cetera, if we were to build a structure on every single R8 lot tomorrow, which is, usually what people panic about when we propose housing initiatives, that would be catastrophic. So it kind of gets to the forest conservation angle of like, some of this vacant land needs to stay vacant, maybe for a while, maybe forever. But I think that it is complicated, probably to the point of why it wasn't included in the first place. And I'm not sure that we'll come up with a community garden use in the next year is going to be broad enough of a solution.
I hear what you're saying. On the forest conservation side, I've had this idea for a long time, and I have not done anything about it, but I will at some point. Is there's really good reasons to keep vacant lots forested, right? Not just for our tree canopy, but also for flood mitigation. And as you know, I have a lot of flooding in my district. So I thought maybe at some point we would do like not just a rezone those lots open space, but designate them for flood mitigation, like have a layer that would be flood mitigation or something like that, right? And that could be tied into all of this, but just acknowledging that is, and then the piece about the non-utilities, the non-utility thing is a lot of a challenge for lots of reasons, not just because, if somebody wants to redevelop there, they have to spend more money to be able to include the utilities. So I have to think about, how that would be if it's one of those lots that, we're already saying is going to be redeveloped anyway, then in this scenario that we were just talking about, that might be one of those that we're bundling, and so it wouldn't get the tax, right? So, it's something to think through, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me start with the question. Is there a motion to accept the staff's recommendations, just as a starting point? Is anybody prepared to make that motion?
We got to change the second one, right, sir?
No, the second, no, well, the second, this is what we talked about.
But I mean, as far as like, for the motion to actually hit the floor, do we need to?
No, because the staff's recommendation, as I understand it, is to disapprove the addition of vacant lots to the legislation.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
All right.
But that
Which we talked about. And that's
well,
why.
there is no amendment to the bill, my
No,
bill
it has nothing to do with the
28.
bill. I'm not, that's. I don't know
So
why we have to go
what
over
I'm
this
saying
again.
is you would take out the second bullet if you want to keep vacant lots in the legislation.
Correct. And if the commission wants to remove or recommend that we remove vacant lots, it would accept bullet number 2, right? We agree?
It would accept bullet number 2, striking the word amendment.
Yeah, if you want to strike, this just goes back to the point I was making. I didn't think it was that big a deal. But I think the use of the word amendment is confusing people.
Right.
It's an amendment to the code. It's not an amendment to the bill. And therefore, so whatever it is, number 2, everybody should be reading number 2 as disapproving the addition of vacant lots to the legislation. That's it.
I'm prepared to move staff's recommendation with that semantic correction.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
I'm
Now
sorry,
let's-
what's the recommendation? Is that you would actually want vacant lots to be taken out of the legislation?
Yes, that's how the chair is interpreting it. You mean to remove vacant lots from the proposal, that they would not be added. We would stay with vacant structures, and we would be changing the effective date, but we would not be adding vacant lots into the law at this time.
Correct.
Correct, okay. Councilwoman, that's what the motion is.
Okay.
So now, there's a moved and seconded, discussion on the motion. Mr. McCoach.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, as I understood, thank you. If we do that, we remove the vacant lot language, it presumes that then there's a follow-up step at the state level to either recategorize or to create the exception clause.
Create the authority for the exemption. That's all the state does, the
Right.
authority. Then we have to
Then
locally.
we just follow up then, okay.
That would be the case whether we do lots or not, because the vacant lots is in the state legislation. We just chose the first time around not to include it.
Okay.
But it's in the legislation for vacant lots and vacant structures,
Right.
in the state bill.
Sure that we have the ability to protect those that need protection.
Okay.
But the language would just basically say in the state bill, allow jurisdictions to create exceptions. Done. That's it. Those 4 words. That's all. Got it.
And then there's a follow-up step back here at home to go ahead and pass those exceptions.
That's correct. We would need to have another ordinance to create those exceptions. That is correct. Yep.
Okay, good for me.
Anything? No.
I have a question.
Commissioner?
So,
Bless you.
so in the state law that's currently in place, vacant lots is included.
That's correct.
So
It authorizes.
it authorizes.
local
Yeah, it's all,
government.
Yeah.
the state law, just so you know, is a state law. It doesn't,
yes.
it's not just for Baltimore City.
Right. Well, I guess then you have to cut, if we do want to include vacant lots at a later date, if you get the exceptions, then you have to come back and do this again?
The council, well, first of all, it's the city council who's going to make the decision. We're here simply to make a recommendation. But I think if the answer to the question is, if the city council decides to remove vacant lots from the bill and therefore it is not enacted into law, the state law remains, and the councilwoman or someone else could come back and say, I now wish to add vacant lots, but it wouldn't be in this bill, it would be in a future bill.
Right.
And you'd still have to cover the question of exemptions and so on.
Okay. I'll accept the recommendations, but I'm all for vacant lots too.
Okay. I'm willing to support the staff recommendation. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate it by saying that I don't really understand why we need to defer to DHCD on the sunset date or the onboarding, but I'm willing to defer to DHCD. I don't think that's a problem, but I think everybody, our opinion matters as much as, it's not a DHCD question, but the council, I'm sure, will sort that out. So if that's the case, and there are no other comments, I'll call for a vote on the motion. Mr. Tissot.
Robin Allen had to step out. She was going to move to online, and I need to move her to a panelist. And so now you may unmute and vote.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm on the street, so I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Approve as much as I could follow the changes.
Thank you. Councilman Bullock?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Bullock? We'll come back to the councilman.
Okay. Christine Griffin?
Approve.
Claudia Jolin?
She stepped out, so we'll
I'm sorry.
mark her.
Approve, sorry.
Okay, I got the councilman as approved. Thank you. Doug McCoach?
Approve.
Calvin Young?
Approved.
Eric Stevenson?
Approve.
John Laria?
Approve.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move now to item 7, Madam Executive Secretary, which will move back up to the forest conservation item, please.
Item number 7, City Council Bill number 26-0161, Natural Resources, Forest and Tree Conservation Conforming Amendments. This is a citywide bill, and Amy Gilder-Basati is presenting on behalf of Rachel Whitehart.
One second.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Planning Commission. I'm Amy Gilder-Basati. I'm the Sustainability Manager with the Office of Sustainability, part of the Planning Department. As mentioned, I'm presenting the staff report on behalf of Rachel Whitehart, who at the meeting on April 2nd provided a briefing, and since then she's given birth, and that is why she's not here today. Yes. And I'm going to save my back and move over here. So Council Bill 26-0161 is Natural Resources, Forest and Tree Conservation Conforming Amendments for the purpose of amending the forest and tree conservation provisions of Article 7 of the Baltimore City Code to comply with new state requirements and providing for a special effective date. This bill was introduced by the Council President on behalf of the administration, and it applies citywide. And one kind of clarifying piece, it applies citywide, but specifically forest conservation does not apply in the city's critical area. So I provided this map. I'm sorry that there's not as much contrast as I'd expected between the gray state-owned property and the what on my computer was more of a peachy excludes critical area color. But basically, the critical area is the land within 1,000 feet of tidal waters. And so that area has its own set of regulations related to trees and other vegetation. A bit of history as far as kind of where this bill comes from and what it relates to. The Forest Conservation Act in Maryland was passed in 1991, and at that time the purpose was to minimize forest loss due to development. There'd been some studies, and so that was at that time the action that was taken. In 2013, after additional studies, there was the Forest Preservation Act, which switched the state's policy to a policy for no net loss, looking at not just forest conservation as a tool, but other tools to not just minimize forest loss, but basically reach a net no loss policy. In the city, our most recent local forest conservation code update occurred in 2020 with Ordinance 2401. And then with recent years, the state has passed some additional bills changing state forest conservation requirements and requiring local jurisdictions to update local codes. So the 2023 SB 526 and HB 723, going back to that no net loss policy, then in 2023, the new policy is adopting a goal of increasing forest canopy across the state. And again, not just using Forest Conservation Act, but also other tools and methods for doing that. But that I'm explaining that because it kind of then influences what the changes are at the state level and what we're looking at for the city. 2024 HB 1511 extended some of the deadlines and changed some additional provisions, but those two things together are what the bill that we're considering today responds to. And HB 1511 set an effective date for these changes as July 1st of 2026. So that's critical because somewhat regardless of if our local bill passes, there are certain provisions that we have to implement beginning July 1st, regardless of the changes to our local program. Some additional local context related to forest and tree canopy. The city's 40% tree canopy goal was set in 2007, and at that time the tree canopy was 27%. Since then, there's been some analysis of the change over time with a 1% increase found over from 2027 to 2015, and a more recent analysis revealing a less than 1% canopy loss of 143 acres in the period from 2018 to 2021. With the briefing, there'd been some questions and discussions related to the Department of Planning's coordination with the Department of Natural Resources, which is DNR, on the updates, both the legislation and then the implementation. So I wanted to provide some additional context and timeline related to that coordination. I was a participant in the summer of 2024 on Department of Natural Resources Forest Conservation Act Working Group looking at, it was primarily focused on definitions for the State Forest Conservation Manual update. And then that December, the state released the first version, updating the State Forest Conservation Technical Manual. There was an additional update in March 2025. And then one of the pieces that we were waiting for to be able to really work on our local changes was the draft model ordinance, which was shared May 23rd of last year. But that was just a draft and not the final. Then in August, we were advised by DNR to not expect a final model ordinance in 2025 and to begin working towards our local updates without the benefit of that final model ordinance. So that somewhat explains kind of our tight timeline. We did start working in 2024 towards updating the program, but we had been somewhat holding off on really moving forward until we had what we felt like was the definitive DNR guidance. So our last point of kind of guidance as far as this is what you have, this is what is not coming, was January 2026, where there was a webinar with MACO and Department of Natural Resources. And from that point, we moved forward. The bill was introduced in March, and with that, we submitted the first reader to DNR for their comment, and we received a letter April 14th, which I've provided for you for briefing, just so that you can understand what their comments were, and it relates to some of the amendments discussed later. So back to the staff report, conformity to plans, both the 2024 Comprehensive Master Plan and the 2019 Sustainability Plan have sections that relate to this bill with goals and actions related to trees and forests, and in the Sustainability Plan, Nature for Nature's Sake is essentially a biodiversity chapter. So the comprehensive plan has goals around increasing the city's tree canopy and preserving existing canopy. The sustainability plan calls for increase of sustainable land management practices for public and private land, including better managing invasive species and increasing the acreage of protected land and improving tree canopy health. Some background on our existing forest conservation program, just so that some of these terms are familiar before we talk about the specifics of what's proposed in the bill. The current local program, the code exists under Article 7, Division 4 in the Natural Resources Code, and then we also have a local forest conservation manual that is a supplement to the state manual. It basically spells out where our local provisions differ from the state manual. And locally, our review trigger for forest conservation is 5,000 square feet of disturbance or subdivision of 5,000 square feet. And it applies to land within a parcel. It does not apply within the right-of-way. With development, there are calculations for determining if there is planting required for mitigation. There are 3 different types. Afforestation is where there's a threshold, an existing tree or forest cover on the site is below that threshold, so you need to provide planting to get up to that threshold. Reforestation is where there's existing forest and some of that forest cover is removed, and so there's planting required to meet that reforestation requirement. And then the city identifies specimen trees as trees with a trunk diameter of 20 inches or greater. And if a tree is removed that is healthy, non-invasive, non-hazardous, there's calculations for mitigation of those.
What if it is invasive?
Then it doesn't require mitigation.
Don't invasive trees contribute to a significant percent of our canopy?
They do. A difference between this policy and critical area. Critical area, I believe, requires rather than like inch for inch replacement, which would be for a healthy tree that we would want to see. They just, I think, require tree for tree replacement. And so you're replacing an invasive tree with a non-invasive tree, but not concerned about size. And the mitigation details for specimen trees, that those requirements are in the manual, which is not addressed in this bill. So the manual will be updated once this bill is passed to then reflect updated details on how to implement the code. Okay. Mitigation options, these are mentioned because the bill does include some additional mitigation options, but in order of preference, preservation and protection of existing forests, then from there, planting on-site is preferred. If that's not available, planting off-site, and finally a fee in lieu payment. So getting into analysis of the legislated changes, so this bill includes mainly changes that are legislated by those state bills that I'd previously mentioned, and local jurisdictions are able to adopt local codes that are as strict or more strict than the state provisions. Going through all of these various legislative changes, a big change is existing with Forest Conservation Code are priorities for determining which forests are priorities for being retained on site and protected. And this new legislation includes new categories for priority retention. The most significant for Baltimore is urban forested areas. And so the map here is Department of Natural Resources map designated urban forested areas, which is essentially the entire city. And the definition for that is forests and urban areas that are most important for providing wildlife habitat, mitigating flooding, high temperatures, or air pollution. Let's see. Another major change is there's now a requirement for a public notice and comment period for projects that are proposing to remove priority retention areas, and so that requires written notice to adjacent property owners and providing the opportunity for written comment. There's a additional tier of public notice and comment for if a site has a net tract area of 5 acres or greater. Net tract area is basically you're subtracting certain categories of things that are not of that parcel that are not subject to forest conservation, and that remaining area is the net tract area. So if a site is 5 or more acres and removing 75% of priority retention, that type of project would require opportunity for both written and verbal comment. And we're planning on implementing those public notice and comment periods in a way that is similar to existing processes for subdivision and DPW for stormwater management. They have a process for waivers for stormwater management and have a similar mechanism. Another provision in the bill is related to judicial review. It provides adjacent property owner or aggrieved person the ability to petition for judicial review of an approved forest conservation plan. And there's an amendment included in the list of amendments that is also provided for you that specifies an applicant may petition for judicial review of Department of Planning's final determination.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to that. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I'll just put a marker that we need to come back to that item.
Sure.
Thank you.
So then getting into the kind of, this is one of the main pieces that actually, where there's variation between what is in the state code and what we're proposing to adopt locally. Afforestation is that threshold where if there is insufficient tree canopy on a site where then planting is required to meet that threshold. This table is comparing the column on the left, the state bills, and the column on the right, the local bill that's being considered. The different categories are mainly the same. The ones that don't differ from the state are related to medium density residential and agricultural areas, many different types of development as far as institutional, high density residential, mixed use, et cetera. And then a new provision that we are adopting, and this is actually one of the few where we don't have the ability to be more strict than the state for this, but solar voltaic facilities are exempt from afforestation. The three areas where we are proposing to continue with what is the current afforestation threshold across the city, or for these areas, which is 15%. This is the current code. The state is allowing certain uses to have a 0% afforestation threshold, and we're proposing to maintain a 15% threshold. Those three things are multifamily housing units with 25 or more dwellings, development located in a priority funding area, which is the entire city is a priority funding area, so that specific one would be exempting the entire city, aside from critical area, from afforestation, and then transit-oriented development. And I do have some maps in a later slide if folks want to see specifically what zones allow for those types of multifamily development and where the TOD areas
I
are
want to ask you a
located.
question and
Sure.
maybe give you time to take a breath. I'm
Yep.
sorry. In general, I'm interested in knowing, it applies to this, and it's sort of as a general principle, I'll say to the director too, like, I need some pre-digestion of when we, and I think the staff report covers this, but I want to make sure, like, we could have done this, but we decided to do that. That's an example, right?
I want to go to the maps for that.
Okay, and that's
Where did-
fine, because what I'm interested in is, like, if the state requires us to do it.
What's it?
If the state,
Then it must have gotten changed when it was compiled in the change to the item we just had. So if it's not there, it's not there.
Okay.
well, anyway, if the state requires us to do it, we should do it. And you should probably tell us what it is, because we probably need to know. And you probably should tell the council, and it needs to be in the bill, and there should be a summary, like, hey, we're doing this, but we got to do it. To the extent that we're making discretionary decisions locally, I want to make sure that we understand exactly what it is and that we're approving them. And I don't know that I disagree with these, but like, and I get the PFA one, I guess, but like, I don't know, why, was it worth considering whether in a TOD, something that we're trying to promote, that we could take advantage of a 0% afforestation threshold? Or did someone say, no, it's 15% in Baltimore City, TOD or not? I don't have an opinion about that at all. And 15% may be perfectly fine, but I don't want us to sort of blow through these, well, we could have done this, but we decided to do that because Baltimore City deserves to have a higher threshold, lower threshold, whichever direction. How do we understand that and make sure that we agree that those judgment calls that are being made when there's discretion being exercised are the appropriate discretion and not somehow contrary to some goal that we're trying to achieve?
Sure. So I would say that not adopting the state's option is what would be in support of the goals that we have. As I mentioned, conformance with existing plans, the sustainability plan and the comprehensive plan both talk about protecting existing tree canopy and expanding tree canopy. And so having an afforestation threshold is a tool for then providing additional tree canopy in neighborhoods that lack tree canopy. And so that's the primary concern for not adopting the 0% is because several of the transit-oriented development areas are in areas with low tree canopy, and so exempting those is potentially removing a tool that in areas where you'd want to see additional tree canopy. Similar with multifamily, when you look at the map, which I'm sorry, my slide didn't make it in, but basically like 50% of the city's zoning allows for multifamily units. And so lots of the neighborhoods where we would want to see tree canopy provided and larger developments like multifamily housing with that many units are potentially an opportunity because they're large enough projects that they would have potentially space or flexibility with their site design to meet that afforestation threshold. And so to me, it's almost counterintuitive that it would be smaller projects that might be more in need of an incentive or flexibility to that requirement and not the larger multifamily projects.
At the bottom of page 7 of the staff report, it says, the State Forest Conservation Code allows local jurisdictions to adopt local code provisions that are more restrictive than state. And then because Baltimore City is unique, this provides an opportunity to customize our local program. Baltimore's context includes, then there are 6 bullets. And then I'm trying to figure out where it then says, and so we have used that concept to vary the minimum requirements, and we have done it for these reasons.
Okay.
And I may not disagree with any of them. I may think they're all great. I just think as a matter of like our responsibility here, I want to make sure that, and I'm listening to what you're saying, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I don't think, but honestly, I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it. I'm just hearing what you've said. I think, anytime we have the situation where the state, federal government, whoever says to us, you need to do these things, and we say, that's great, and we're going to do these other things that you've given us the authority to do, I think that has to be very, very clearly highlighted to make sure that we agree. Because there may be something that's not as simple as this. Maybe this is an example where it's a slam dunk, but there may be others where one person's view is we should do this, and everybody else's view is, well, why? So how do I make sure that I'm comfortable? How do I know what that list is right now?
So what you mentioned asking for as far as the staff report that basically what I provided with that series of bullets on context, that was kind of the intention. I didn't kind of follow through all the way to what you'd suggested be provided as far as the therefore I recommend. But that context is some of the explanation for why we're not necessarily proposing to use the minimums for these specific things that we're proposing to maintain the level that we have currently.
Well, I'll just tell you my view, and this has nothing to do with the merits of it. But honestly, I'm not comfortable voting for it without knowing what choices we have made as opposed to what requirements we have complied with, without having them clearly laid out before me. Because I might say, why? What if I thought that, imagine, TOD is so important it should be 0%, and the state says we can do it. That's not my position. But I don't know how many examples of that there are. Have we gone above and beyond in 3 cases, in 10 cases, in 30 cases? I just feel like I need to know. I can't just kind of go, okay. And I don't want to dig around for it. So I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but that's my concern.
So further into the staff report, we do provide an evaluation as far as impacts of these changes on projects, as far as taking a retrospective look at projects over a 5-year period. Of the 163 projects that were reviewed for forest conservation, only 19 of them had forest impacts. So that gives you a sense of anything related to forest impacts, what percentage. And so when you consider that the citywide, there's 27% canopy, it's a lower percentage of that, of the projects that are impacting canopy. And then related to the comment period requirements, which we're required to implement, that would apply to 4% of the projects over that period of time. I also looked into, of that 6 projects, my brain is not following through with me, but basically I looked into, like, for residential multifamily, the 25 units and above, how many of those were there that impacted forest? Only 2 of the 163 projects were multifamily projects that would have fallen into that 0%.
I'm not sure how what you're telling me is relevant to the question I asked.
I guess I'm trying to categorize based on our experience without knowing what projects will be coming in the future, the relative scale of development projects that specific provisions will apply to. Is your question different than that? I just want to make sure that.
Are you saying don't worry about the decisions we've made because it's not going to affect a lot of projects?
I'm just trying to provide the context of what does the universe look like now? What might the universe look like under this bill?
Are you trying to ask, how did you get to 15?
Yeah, well, I think Amy said that 15 was the baseline before, and then
right, that's the current
we're currently 15. The state said you can go to 0 if you want, and we said no, we're going to stick with 15. So that may not be a great. I mean, that may be we've been 15 for a long time. I guess it would be worth knowing why, but I don't know if there are other examples where you've picked a new number where you haven't stayed the course with 15. We've been 15. The state says you could be 0. We say no. We like our 15. It's working for us. But are there other instances in which we've exercised discretion where the state has said you can do this, and we're like, thanks, state, but we think that we should have a different rule in Baltimore City?
I mean, as we go through this presentation, I don't
mean the bill. I'm talking about in this context.
Yeah.
Not writ large.
I could have probably organized the staff report differently rather than the way that I organized it are these are state changes, these are voluntary changes. And I probably should have then within that organized the state changes with which ones
Yeah.
are we proposing to take straight from the state versus which ones are we proposing to vary from. As I go through the presentation, I'm happy to focus more on the ones and the decision behind where we might not be applying the state option.
And what's isn't there a window in which we have to do this? I forget from the last presentation.
So July 1st, the changes go into effect whether or not this bill is adopted or not. We're trying to get this into effect so that we have the opportunity to then communicate what the city is choosing to do, so that folks then have a better sense of what to expect.
And if I said to you, I'd like to wait 3 weeks, would the 3 weeks matter?
It would then, as far as the city council process, push that process into the budget season where it might be more difficult to have them take the bill through the remaining process by July 1st.
I see. Well, look, I'm not trying to, it's late. I'm sure people are like, John, shut up. But like, these are the kinds of fundamental questions that I think need to be asked. And I have no way of knowing whether the choice you've made is defensible or not. I'll bet you it is, but I feel sort of responsible to be like, tell me about the choice that you made. Because I have seen many instances in a regulatory environment, it's not just Baltimore City, where people are like, well, they told us we could do X, but we did X plus. Why? Because we thought X plus was a good idea. Because Bob thought X plus was a good idea. And I'm like, good for Bob.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the process by which we decided that that was a good idea? And I trust you. I trust the department. I know you're professionals. I think it's quite likely that you're right, but I'm not really sure that that's the way it's supposed to work. So I don't really want to hold this up. I don't want to hold it up today any longer, although wait till you hear my next issue. And I don't want to mess up your launch sequence. And I guess I'll rely on the fact, if you want me to, Director and Amy, that this is, and fellow commissioners, that this is that the choices you're making are the correct and responsible ones. I'll try to go along with it, but that's my concern.
Okay.
And if you guys think I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear what you have to say. But I just think we have to set some guidelines here about when we adopt this kind of stuff, what the expectations are.
So one piece I was going to quickly go back to related to the 15% that we were just discussing. 15% is also the afforestation requirement for critical area, which is not changing. It's not up for voter discussion. And so that's another justification for maintaining the 15% in those other categories, is it would be then potentially an equity issue to have different standards in different locations in the city. Let's see. Oops. Were there any other questions before I move on from the afforestation? Okay. Then changes to reforestation calculations, that's where forest is removed. It's a little bit difficult to compare this to the current way that the regulations work, because there's a totally, rather than it just being a straight ratio, there are kind of, there's a threshold where if you clear a certain amount, then you have to, at a certain point, the requirements ramp up significantly. And so it's a little bit difficult to compare, because if you're doing a lot of clearing, you might actually have to plant more than 1-to-1. So that's somewhat of a difficult comparison, but related to what the state allows the city to adopt, it's the same three categories that that potentially would differ from what we're proposing with the 1-to-1 straight across the board. The multifamily housing units, the same 25 unit threshold. The state is allowing 1/4 of an acre of reforestation for every 1 acre cleared. The development located in priority funding areas is a little bit nuanced, because they allow the 1/4-to-1 ratio, but because the entire city is also a priority forest, or priority, the other term that's not priority funding area. Yes, priority retention area. Basically, that essentially overrides the priority funding area and would be 1-to-1. Transit-oriented development also has the option for 1/4 to 1, and then the solar facilities would be 1-to-1. And so again, looking at those two, multifamily and transit-oriented development, as far as an equity issue and applying the regulations consistently across zones, what we're recommending is the 1-to-1 rather than the 1/4 to 1. As I'd mentioned, it's basically from the reviews that we've done, a small percentage of potential developments where that ratio would apply. And so it's potentially kind of for the city arbitrary as far as why would you want to incentivize 25 or more units rather than some other number. And then transit-oriented development, one piece to know related to that is state property is not subject to our local code. So those properties, if they are state properties and stay state properties, they would be the 1/4 to 1 ratio anyway.
I mean, you can look into this and get back to us. It's a good question to ask long-term, but, I mean, there's this whole new TOD initiative. It's either state land being made available to private developers for development, or it's joint development, in which case the state and the developer are doing it jointly. In the latter case, in the former case, clearly private rules apply because it's a private developer. In the latter case, I'm actually not entirely sure, but it would be good to know. I don't think the state is expecting, I don't know. I don't know if in the joint development context, the state thinks, well, the state's involved, so, you can't tell us what to do, or whether there's some submission to, so it would be great if you could just get back to that. Because I don't think that TOD in every respect, even on state land, gets treated as if the Department of General Services came in and decided to build a bus depot.
So I know that for the Reisterstown Road TOD area, which is active, that's falling under state review.
That's who the owner of the land is.
And as Eric's reminded me, it's based on the owner of the land.
Okay, let's come back to that at some point.
Okay.
Please.
Then mitigation options. The colors on here are not a difference between what we're choosing to opt into and what the state allows. This is comparing from current to what's proposed, which is what the state allows. Currently, the only options are on-site planning, off-site planning, credits from a forest mitigation bank, and fee and lieu payment. There are 2 new options that are available: restoration of on-site or off-site degraded forests and acquisition of off-site easement of unprotected forests. And so those are tools that we're very excited about having added, just because both it provides more options before we would get to a fee and lieu payment, and it really gets to some of the potential challenges that we have related to those goals in our comprehensive plan and sustainability plan related to forest health and preserving forest. Into the voluntary updates. So there are some changes to exemptions. This bill would eliminate, there's a misspelling there, but a dwelling house exemption that currently exists. It's not something that is currently applied very often. And that change would align it with how that same requirement is handled for stormwater management. The bill would add exemptions for maintenance and retrofitting of stormwater management practices and adding exemptions for forest management. And there are more specific parameters in there as far as what would need to be submitted to document those things. There are also some more limited exemptions that are added where it's not a total exemption from forest conservation, but an exemption for afforestation, and that's for linear projects, which are generally utility type projects, transportation projects, where afforestation is somewhat incompatible with what the project is. Urban agriculture, where it's an agriculture use, then also voluntary stormwater management projects, and there's a size threshold for that as far as beyond a certain size, the afforestation would apply. It also codifies some of our policies related to previous mitigation plantings and tracking those plantings. And as discussed previously with the briefing, proposal to increase our fee in lieu rates to keep current with what the costs are for planting. So the $600 and $300 rates that we currently have were updates that occurred in 2020. And since then, we've evaluated the change in costs since then and are proposing the $700 and $350 based on changes to costs. So overall, looking backward at a 5-year period, the anticipated impacts, there are new exemptions that would simplify review for some of those types of projects, the stormwater management and urban agriculture and such. The notice and comment period related to forest clearing would not apply to most of the projects that we see for review, but it would impact potentially a percentage of projects. The increased reforestation ratio potentially could result in increased costs for projects that would have to provide reforestation. But however, there are additional tools that are added that can help with addressing that cost and providing more flexibility in how mitigation is met before reaching the point of a fee in lieu. But where a fee in lieu would be required, there would be higher rates to stay in line with inflation. The provided for you, there were 3 amendments that I've worked with the Department of Legislative Reference on. I'd mentioned that we'd received a comment letter from the Department of Natural Resources. Their comments relate to a few different categories, primarily related to definitions. And so we have taken their recommendation to adjust the definition for linear project. And the specifics are there in the amendment package. Also, the DNR recommended that we include definitions for maintenance agreement, lot, neck tract, and watershed. They also recommended defining variance, but that was already defined in the code. And then there's a second amendment related to the applicant's entitle for petition for judicial review, which I believe you wanted to come back to. And so I don't know if this is the point where you want to come back to that item.
Why don't you just do 3?
Okay. And then 3 is a very minor change. In one place in the code, it mentions a 3-year maintenance agreement that is specifically a requirement for forest mitigation banks. Later, it in a section related to violations, it mentions a 2-year maintenance agreement. As far as violation of a 2-year maintenance agreement is something that the city could potentially enforce. And so we're striking that 2-year from that because a 3-year maintenance agreement isn't the only type of length of time for a maintenance agreement. So it just avoids confusion by striking the mention of 2-year.
Okay. So everybody just bear with me, but here's my question.
Okay.
The current, you have in the slide deck and sort of in the reports and so on, the current role of the Planning Commission is to approve variances to the Forest Conservation Code. The update, and it is reflected in the bill, changes that, and you don't have to go look at this, on page 36, from Planning Commission to the Planning Director, which seems reasonable to me. I mean, one can have an opinion about it, but that seems reasonable because the sort of general structure of things in the modern codes and manuals and so on is the director has more authority. There were things in the zoning code we gave to the director, not the commission, but we gave the commission the right to review upon appeal the decision of the director, and that occurs over and over again in various places. So it said director of planning. The bill as introduced said an applicant may appeal the department's final determination to the Planning Commission, and then it has some other stuff, including the fact that it's final and binding. And my guess is that somebody said it can't be final and binding, it needs to be appealable, et cetera, to the circuit court. And it says, it clarifies, in the amendment summary in your staff report says it clarifies the applicant's entitlement to seek judicial review and strikes text that stated the determination of a Planning Commission will be final and binding. It does do that, but it takes the planning commission completely out of the process, and that's not what the summary says, and it's not the way we normally do things. So I don't know where that came from specifically, presumably from lawyers, not from you guys, and I don't know if they said that or if it just got a little bit twisted. It's one thing to say, we should let the planning director do this, makes sense to me. And it's another thing to say you can't have no remedy after an administrative agency like the planning director or the planning commission acts upon something. But I don't know where we signed up for the planning commission has no role in that process. And unless that's the intent, and we should talk about it, I think the conventional process, and I think it applies elsewhere in the code, is the director does something, the commission hears it basically on appeal from the director. You could have a hearing, it happens rarely. And then, in order to preserve the question about potential rights from there are appeals, there's a right to from an applicant, an aggrieved person, to go from the planning commission to the judicial process. So unless there's a reason otherwise, my view is that we should do that. We should let the planning director have the authority as it has in the bill. We should let the applicant have an appeal to the for judicial review if she is dissatisfied with the administrative determination. But I think the planning commission is supposed to be in the middle of that, where the director appeals, you appeal from the director to the commission. If you're disappointed with the commission, then you go to the circuit court. It's not because I think we're going to see a lot of these. It's not because I really feel the need to be like in charge of appeals on forest conservation. It's because once we stop doing that, someone's going to say, well, you don't do it that way in forest conservation. So if the sort of, practice now is that we delegate more stuff to the director, subject to planning commission review, then we should just do that everywhere. That's relevant. Yep. So you can go check it out. You can ask. My guess is that whoever it came from probably is indifferent to that if you add a middle step. They're just concerned about the final step, which is the ability to not be deprived of judicial review. But I don't know.
Yep. So one nuance related to that as far as where I believe that the middle step was removed is if you go back to page 16 of the bill. So judicial review in the bill before the amendments only actually appears in this section on page 16. It doesn't appear at all later at that point where it says the planning commission's determination is final. And so the amendment was in response to the fact that, we have judicial review mentioned up here on page 16, but then later on, it's contradictory to say that the planning commission's decision is final, which you, it sounded like you agree with.
I mean, I agree that the opposite position is reasonable. I don't necessarily, but okay.
But so on page 16 where it mentions judicial review, the specifics of this, it says, adjacent property owner or other aggrieved person petitioning for judicial review of an approved forest conservation plan shall file the petition in accordance with the Maryland rules not later than 30 days after approval of the forest conservation plan. And so I believe then part of that skipping the planning commission is I don't believe that our process, if there would be an appeal to the planning commission, would allow for judicial review for somebody to apply within 30 days if they're made to first appeal to the planning commission before they can seek judicial review.
Well, I don't know. Frankly, it's going to be hard to synthesize these things sitting here with everybody and the hour. So maybe we just need to talk about it.
No, but the specific provision is the state's.
I just want to get to the bottom of it because I want it to be consistent and correct, and I don't want to. If it's in some way sort of a slippery slope towards, changing that structure. I see what you're saying, and it's a good point, but I'm not exactly sure how to put this together, and it would be wrong to try and dig into it now. So we can figure it out. Let's see where the commission ends up at the end of this, and maybe we can just find a practical way to address it.
And just for some additional context as far as working through those amendments, in the back and forth on how to address the fact that judicial review appears in this one place and then planning commission is the final decision in another place, That coordination involved both Department of Legislative Reference and the Law Department. The Law Department has not yet weighed in on Department of Legislative Reference's recommendation for that amendment. And so that's where I was kind of in a spot where, yes, this is kind of one piece of advice from one area of city government, but the Law Department hasn't weighed in, and Planning Commission is meeting, and so I at least want to bring to you, and I don't have a law background, so I'm deferring to both of them.
No, that's totally reasonable on your part. I'm just raising it because
Yep.
it caught my attention, and I just
Mhm.
think we should figure it out before we look back later and say, well, why did we do that? And, I might even be wrong, which is fine too, but I just think we need to get to the bottom of it. So thank you for that feedback. And then let's figure out how to connect to try and disentangle that a little bit outside the confines of a planning commission hearing.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is taken from wholesome to every jurisdiction. So it's not like zoning where it's different jurisdictions.
Yeah.
This would be better to align the state law.
So final slides, the staff report looks at the planning department's equity considerations related to the impact of the bill. The main points are that the proposal maintains similar afforestation and reforestation standards for nearly all land uses aside from the ones with exemptions. And it applies the same afforestation threshold as is not exists and is not changing for the critical area. The new comment period offers opportunity for residents to engage and provide comments related to clearing and priority retention areas. And then there's additional flexibility for projects to meet requirements on-site or off-site. And because our preference is for requirements to be met on-site, that's seen as a positive thing for equity. Related to engagement, in the development of the bill, we have not had the opportunity to do as much engagement with external stakeholders as what we had wanted to and had planned based on the timeline for all of this. But we have consulted with and received comments from city agency staff and local tree experts when this was under development. The Sustainability Commission heard this item last week and voted to recommend approval. And then related to internal operations, the staff report goes into more details, but there are impacts to planning department staff as far as the work necessary to update the public-facing documents that applicants use to understand their requirements. We'll also be going through an update process to the local forest conservation manual, and then ongoing with the new public notice and comment period, there'll be some additional work for staff to coordinate those comment periods. So finally, the recommendation from staff is approval with amendments. The package of 3 amendments is included there and we've previously discussed the details of those.
Okay. Questions? Well, I mean, if there's a motion, I don't want to slow down the overall process here. So if there's a motion is there a motion to accept the staff recommendation with these amendments, subject to caveat that Amy and I will work with whomever else we need to on number 2, and I will just have to keep you in the loop. I don't want to overly formalize this. I just want to make sure that we don't neglect to look at it. So, I would accept a motion with that sort of footnote, and we'll figure it out, and then we'll get back to the commission and let you know exactly what the outcome is. If it needs further action, we'll have to deal with it in due course.
Motion to approve with amendments?
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
All those any discussion?
Yeah, quick.
Of course,
clarification.
of course.
And that is with regard to your comments about the validation of our 15% sort of designation. I would like to see that as a part of your working with Amy and the others, that's all. I
Well-
think it's really important because I think people will come in and I think we have to be able to justify it. I don't think it's that hard, actually. I mean, the areas that we're asking for a higher density planting are high density developments. More people, more intensive utilization of the land. You would like to be able to provide folks the relief of shade. But again, I do think John's got a point. There's nothing that we can sort of catalog and reference to. So if you could.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be in the motion, and however we want to approach that. I do think I was going to ask you separate from this, and I'll just ask it now, but not, I think you should try and figure out a way to summarize that for us, and I would say more broadly speaking, and I think we had this conversation when I think we had a presentation on stormwater, on floodplain, on floodplain. I just think that the department should be in the habit of identifying when we are going above and beyond a requirement and justifying it. It will probably almost always be justifiable. I mean, I'm not suggesting the department doesn't have good judgment. I'm just suggesting that I think it's important to go through that process because I have been, as a practitioner in the past, in situations where people say they don't have to do that. They only have to do this other thing, and now they're doing that. Why are they doing that? And sometimes there's a good answer. Maybe there's often a good answer. But I think we owe people a good answer, and I want to make sure that we've thought about it. And because our job here, and Deputy Mayor is here, our job is to make it easier rather than harder to get things done, subject to totally legitimate public policy concerns about floodplain, forestation, and all the other things that we care about. Like, that's the job we have, is to strike that balance somehow. But I just, I just don't want us to be in a situation where people say, Baltimore City only has to do 7, and instead they're doing 13, and I can't figure out why, and it's causing a problem. That's all. So I would just say to you, Ren, that's just something we should be keeping an eye on. And if we're going to go now and do revisions to design manuals and subdivision manuals and landscape manuals, that question is going to come up over and over and over again about the balance between the benefit from the regulation and the burden that the regulation imposes. And we have to actively be evaluating that. So anyway, so the motion's on the table. Is there any questions about the motion? Okay. Mr. Tiso, can we have a roll call on this, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Robin Allen?
Approve.
She said approve.
Yep. Councilman Bullock?
Approve.
Christine Griffin?
Approve.
Doug McCoach?
Approve.
Calvin Young?
Approve.
Eric Stevenson?
Approve.
And John Laria.
I'll abstain,
Thank you.
especially since it does not affect the outcome, but. Okay, is there anything else on the agenda? Okay, any new business? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
We'll adjourn.
Aye.
Thank you very much.